Inside a busy weapon shop, someone yells out in total shock about a red rarity item being super rare, while a 28-year-old C-rank swordsman named Dalmaki looks at a blade, knowing for a fact that this thing is the real deal. He asks the shop owner if he's serious, confident that his appraisal skill is never wrong because the weapon he's holding is the legendary red rarity magic sword flam. The shopkeeper asks if he finally joined a party to get gear like that, but tells him there's no way since he's strictly solo, ever since his old teammates betrayed him and left him for dead. The shopkeeper tells him he should really think about finding a crew again, but just brushes it off. The shopkeeper mentions that being in a group makes finding rare loot way easier, even bringing up a top-tier A-rank party from the capital, but just tells him he's heading to the guild and drops off his longsword for a tune-up. As he walks out, he ignores the shopkeeper yelling at him to listen and thinks to himself that joining a party is just asking for trouble. He stops for a second, trying to remember if that famous group called the Storm Clouds was actually S-rank or not. Then he just shakes it off, telling himself that none of that high-level stuff matters to him right now. Walks through town, telling himself he's hitting B-rank soon and that A-rank is actually within reach. But then he stops in his tracks when he sees 3 elite-looking adventurers waiting for him. The guy in the middle introduces himself as Mardas, the leader of an A-rank party called Red Silver Moon, and says he needs help with a job. Realizes these are the big shots the shopkeeper mentioned earlier, so he asks what the deal is, saying his help depends on what they're actually doing. Mardas explains they're hunting a unicorn that showed up in the Forest of Eternal Darkness, and the pay is going to be huge. They head out into the woods, using a light spell to cut through the pitch-black trees. Mardas thanks him for coming along, mentioning that unicorns are incredibly fast, so having another hand makes things way easier. He keeps talking while they walk, explaining they really needed an extra attacker for a guaranteed kill, though he makes it clear that isn't getting the horn. Doesn't mind since 30 gold coins is an insane amount of money. Even if he hates working with people, the 10 gold up front was too good to say no to. He's already dreaming about the 6-month vacation he can take after this is over, just as the mage in the group pulls out a map to check their path. Mardas looks back and tells to handle the safety checks in the rear. It seems like a normal request, but just says okay and stays back while the other 3 keep moving deeper into the dark woods. As walks off to do his job, the rest of the group huddles over the map, sharing a look that definitely isn't friendly. Spots something through the trees and calls out that he's found what they're looking for, thinking they're actually on the same team. He yells for everyone to get ready for a fight, but right as he says it, a dark blade is drawn and eyes go wide when he realizes the threat isn't in front of him. A sword goes straight through his chest from behind, making him gasp for air as blood starts to spill. Mardas and the 2 women just stand there. They aren't helping, they're just watching him die. Mardas starts laughing his head off at the sight, while struggles to even breathe on the ground. Mardas looks down at him with a smirk, saying he can't believe the guy fell for such a simple trap. Mardas laughs about how lucky they are that is such an idiot, since it made the whole job easy. The mage joins in, calling a complete fool as they stand over him. One of the girls calls him total trash while he lies there, bleeding out and realizing he's been played once again. Starts putting the pieces together, figuring one of them must have been creeping outside the weapon shop, listening to his whole conversation with the owner. He knows that only the owner can pull items out of a magic bag, so they lured him out into the woods for one specific reason. They needed to wait for the right moment, forcing him into a spot where he'd have to pull out his magic sword flam on his own. Stares up at the sky, finally seeing the whole setup and cursing himself for being so blind. Mardas gives him a nasty smirk, saying he appreciates being a quick learner before telling him he's taking the magic sword for himself. The group turns their backs on him, with the warrior girl saying they should just get out of there. Clenches his fist in the dirt as she says she can't even stand breathing the same air as a piece of garbage like him. Mardas looks at the magic sword in his hand, feeling like he's finally got what he deserves while his party stands by. Even though he's beat up, tries to crawl after them, muttering through his teeth about how he's never going to forgive them for this. Mardas just sighs like he's bored, telling he's being way too persistent, and as he grabs his hilt, he says forgiveness doesn't even matter anymore. The guy actually starts laughing as he swings, telling he's going to be dead in a few minutes anyway before the blade rips through chest, leaving a massive bloody gash that makes him scream out in pure pain. The girls just wave him off with a smile, telling him he should at least try to struggle a bit while he dies. Before leaving for good, Mardas stands over him one last time, placing his boot right on the back of head and grinding down with a sick grin on his face. He looks totally unhinged as he tells to make sure he dies in absolute agony. The party walks off into the distance, leaving face down in the dirt, but his hand starts to twitch as he tries to say something. Lies there in a growing pool of his own blood, barely conscious, but he uses every bit of strength left to gasp out the word status. Manages to pull up his status, But it's looking bad. His stamina is already down to 5, and the bleeding isn't stopping, making him lay there in the grass thinking about how he got played yet again. His stamina drops to 4 as he realizes he's completely out of options and feels his life slipping away, thinking about how he's just going to die in the dirt without ever actually accomplishing anything. His stamina hits 3 then 2 while he flashes back to being betrayed by his old crew. All those people he trusted just laughing at him behind his back, which leads to the memory of Marta's and the girls tricking him seeing that smug guy holding his stolen magic sword like it was nothing. Moving on realizes his entire life has just been one long run of putting up with garbage from other people. And as his stamina hits 1, he decides right there that if he ever gets a second chance at this, he's done holding back. He's tired of just taking it, so he makes a vow to become stronger than anyone else, so strong that he can live exactly how he wants. His stamina finally hits 0, and the wind just blows through the trees, and the tall grass looks like it's finally over for him. On's eye suddenly snaps wide open. He's completely confused and tells himself to wait a second because something definitely isn't right. On is still awake and wonders why he can even think right now, especially since his status clearly shows his stamina has hit 0, yet he decides to focus and check his stats one more time just to be absolutely sure about what's happening. So the screen pops up and confirms his condition is officially dead, making him realize that he really did kick the bucket. As he lies there face down in the dirt, he starts wondering if being dead is actually supposed to feel like this, because he always figured it would be more like those stories where your soul just starts floating up toward heaven, but instead of having some crazy out-of-body experience where he can look down at his own corpse, he's just stuck there. Either way, he realizes he's in bad shape since he can't move his body or even let out a sound, and it seems like every single one of his senses is completely gone now except for his vision, which leaves him staring at the grass and wondering if he's really just going to be stuck here unable to do a single thing. On's body just sits there in the middle of the trail, eyes open but totally lifeless and covered in blood from the fight. On's hand lies limp on the trail as bugs crawl over his skin, and he starts to notice a gross smell before he suddenly gasps, realizing he's actually conscious and wondering just how long he's been lying out here. So he tries to check his status, but only a weird groan comes out, and the hunger he feels is totally overwhelming. His stomach makes a loud, nasty growl while he lies in the grass, so he tries to focus his mind as hard as possible. The status screen finally pops up and he's relieved he can see it, but then he sees something that makes him freak out. He stares at the screen in disbelief because his race isn't human anymore. It says he's officially a zombie. On touches his face and realizes he's actually rotting, wondering if he really turned into one of those monsters. He tells himself to stay calm and not lose it since he needs to get a grip and assess the situation first. Everything is at level 1 and his stats are trashed, except for his luck, which is way higher than it used to be. As he looks closer at the menu, he notices some new skills and wonders if they're just going to keep growing. On's stomach makes a loud, miserable growl as he lies there. He's starving and can barely move after everything that's happened. He looks around and notices the trees haven't changed since he was killed, which means he's still stuck right in the middle of the forest of eternal darkness. It finally clicks that since he's a monster now, he's the one who's going to be hunted by adventurers. He remembers this spot usually only has low-level undead that don't drop any good loot, so at least only rookies usually hang out around here. He pushes himself up, thinking that if he can just grind some levels before he runs into anyone, he'll be able to handle himself. He remembers his grandpa always telling him not to stress over things he can't figure out yet, and to just give it his all with what he's got. He's still got his adventure knowledge and the gear in his magic bag, which gives him a solid head start. With a creepy look on his face, he decides it's time to start the grind and takes off running through the trees to find something to kill. 6 hours go by and he's deep in the woods, getting his hands dirty as he scraps with a skeleton. He ends it with a clean punch to the head, dropping the E-rank monster's health to 0 instantly. On stands over the pile of bones and notes that's the 9th skeleton he's dropped, even if the fight felt pretty amateur. He checks his progress, wondering if he's finally managed to level up yet, and calls out for his status screen to show up. The transparent window pops into view right in front of his face, but it's not what he expected. He's shocked to see he's already hit level 7, but his actual stat numbers haven't budged at all since he started. Scanning the screen further, he spots a note about having 21 points left and tries to figure out what that's for. He stares at the interface for a second as a new idea starts to click. He wonders if he can just manually dump those points into whatever stats he wants. He decides to test it out and focuses all his attention on his agility, and it actually works. He watches the number jump up and gets pretty hyped that he can just boost himself like that on the fly. He realizes that while humans train to earn their stats, monsters like him work backward. Their physical bodies just change to match whatever the numbers say. Since he's a zombie and can't use magic, He figures there's no point in wasting points on being smart or skillful right now. He tests out his new speed and takes off running through the woods. His body feels way lighter than before, and he's definitely glad he put everything into his agility first. On moves through the forest, testing out his new speed, he thinks about how for monsters, stats actually change their physical bodies, which makes him think he can take on just about anything around here, and he realizes the only real threat left is a ghoul. He knows they have crazy high attack power, and getting hit just once could be a wrap for him, so he keeps up his pace while spotting something weird ahead. He asks himself if that's another zombie, and sees a guy with a mohawk just absolutely going to town on a tree trunk, leaving on pretty confused. He thinks that even if the dude is starving, a tree is probably the last thing he should be trying to eat, but then a new thought clicks in his head. He says he just realized something big and tells himself he shouldn't be looking at things with human logic anymore. He figures that since he's a zombie now, that guy over there is basically his senior in the zombie world, so he thinks there might actually be a legit reason for the tree eating. He decides to give it a shot and heads over to a tree to see what happens when he opens wide and bites down hard. He rips a chunk right out of the bark, but as he starts chewing, he realizes it tastes completely gross. He finishes swallowing the wood and stands there for a second waiting for some kind of change, only to find nothing is happening. He starts to complain that it was a waste of time, but right then, a level up notification flashes across his vision. On is hyped after seeing the level up notification, jumping for joy and calling out for his status screen as the other zombie lies there, and he notices he just unlocked a brand new skill called predation. It lets him get some health back whenever he eats something, which brings a pretty creepy smile to his face while he stops to show some respect. He bows to the Mohawk zombie, apologizing and telling the guy he won't ever forget him for the help, but then it is right back to business. He tells himself it's time to keep the grind going and starts running through the forest looking for more targets to find a skeleton nearby. He moves fast, kicking, and then ripping right through its ribcage with a heavy strike that totally wrecks it, so he keeps moving. He thinks about how much easier it is to track down monsters now that his speed is way higher than before. But just then he spots a ghoul. He realizes the monster is headed straight for him, looking pretty dangerous as it pushes through the brush, making On hesitate for a second. He knows that with his new stats he could easily just turn around and run away to stay safe, yet he stops himself. He says no to the idea of running and reaches down to grab a thick branch off the ground, gripping it tight because he hasn't forgotten the choice he made when he first died. He stares down the ghoul in the distance, ready to stand his ground and fight. On looks completely locked in, telling himself he's going to get stronger than anyone else as he rushes straight at the monster. He thinks about how getting stronger means he can finally live however he wants, so he swings that thick branch with everything he's got. It hits the ghoul with a massive crack, and the monster drops right there. On cheers, hyped that he actually managed to take down something way above his rank, but something feels weird. He stops mid-celebration, looking pretty confused as this bright energy starts swirling all around him. He just stands there while his whole body starts to glow, and he feels a massive shock hit him. A screen pops up asking him to pick an evolution path, making him realize this is that thing adventurers always talk about. He remembers hearing how monsters can totally change their forms and starts weighing his options. He realizes he can pick his own stats, meaning he can just buff his speed to cover a ghoul's usual weakness, so he goes for it. He locks in his choice and officially evolves into an eater ghoul. On looks at his hand and realizes something's different, taking a slow breath as he tests out his voice by going through the vowels. He's pretty stoked to find out he can still talk, so he shows off those new fangs and calls out for his status window. The screen glows right in front of him, showing all his new info and confirming he's officially a ghoul now. He checks his stats and sees his strength and durability took a big jump, but the best part is the rotten status is gone. He's honestly just hyped that he doesn't smell like a corpse anymore, so he starts thinking that if he can just find some better clothes, he might actually be able to talk to people again. He starts sprinting through the forest, whistling a tune because things are finally looking up as he pushes through the bushes with a smirk. He knows he needs to keep his levels moving and promises himself he's going to keep getting stronger no matter what. On throws a heavy punch into the empty air, feeling the raw power of his new body, and then he takes off, sprinting through the thick forest with speed he never had before. But the high doesn't last long and he starts feeling his stomach growl. He admits he's hitting a wall because tree bark is the only thing he's eaten since turning into a zombie, so he pulls out some mushrooms, noting he's got plenty of these restful ones on hand. He knows a little bit helps with sleep, but eating too many will definitely knock him out cold, and even though his iron stomach stops him from getting sick, he'll still end up under a sleep spell. He just can't believe he's stuck with such an annoying situation. He slams his fist into a tree to snap out of his funk, telling himself to stop acting so depressed because he's got big plans. He shouts that he's going to be better than those top-tier parties and reminds himself he already decided to be the strongest one out there. His eyes lock in with a scary amount of focus as he promises himself that he's going to make it happen when he suddenly hears the sound of running water nearby. He gets hyped thinking there might be fish to eat and tears through the bushes, diving straight into the river the second he sees something moving in the water. On realizes things are going south fast. The water's moving way quicker than he expected and it's looking pretty bad. Just then the river hits a massive drop, sending everything crashing down the waterfall. On ends up washed up on the ground, groaning as he tries to pull himself together. He sits up in a cave behind the falls, thinking about how that was a total close call. If he wasn't lucky, he'd be dead right now. His wet feet slap against the stone as he heads further in, reminding himself that he won't get a second miracle, so he needs to be careful. He decides the only way to go is deeper into the cave for now, until he stops dead in his tracks, wondering what that glowing light up ahead is. It turns out to be a magic circle right in the middle of the floor, and he realizes he's standing at a dungeon entrance. He's not sure what's waiting for him inside, but going back through the waterfall isn't an option. Plus, there might be monsters in there he can actually eat. On tells himself it's time to move and steps onto the glowing circle to see where it leads. On finds himself in a massive stone room covered in vines and weeds, just standing there taking in the view and thinking about how the inside looks. He takes a step with his bare feet, but then a heavy growl starts up, and he realizes it's definitely not his stomach. Suddenly, a giant glowing eye opens, revealing an orc standing right in front of him. On recognizes it immediately as the beast grips its spear, while the monster snarls at him. Usually these things are ranked from F to SSS, but the high-tier ones are myths, belonging to the world of legend. On doesn't look bothered at all as the orc comes charging toward him, grabbing him by the middle and slamming him into the wall. It looks like he's in trouble until On completely flips the script and bites down on the orc's shoulder, blood spraying everywhere as he pins the beast to the ground. He starts eating the thing alive, yelling about how good it tastes, and finishes the whole thing with a satisfied swallow. He puts his hands together with a big smile, saying orcs are basically just a drink. On sits there for a second and lets out a long sigh, putting his hands together to give thanks for the meal. But as he starts walking, he realizes that eating that whole monster barely even touched his hunger. He looks down at the bone in his hand, thinking about how he really wants a lot more meat than that. And right then, he spots a staircase leading further into the structure. On figures out this is one of those dungeons where you actually head upward, so he starts making his way up, until he suddenly freezes, a look of complete shock hitting his face. Waiting for him at the top is a literal army of orcs, all standing there with their spears ready. The monsters look absolutely ticked off, and On tries to play it cool while awkwardly holding a piece of their friend before deciding it's time to go, giving a quick apology and turning to run as fast as he can. The whole group of orcs starts charging after him in a line, while On just keeps sprinting back down the stairs to get away. On realizes that if these guys just come at him one by one, then this staircase is basically just a free buffet. So he stops running and starts tearing into them, yelling that nothing has changed as the monsters go down. After the dust settles, On wipes some blood off his face and admits he was actually a bit worried, since there were over 20 of them. He figures it was a monster room which would have killed anyone else, but the experience is worth it. On pulls up his status screen to check his progress, deciding that his power is still too low for crowds, so he's going to focus on strength and speed next. Before doing anything else, he sits down to start eating all that fresh meat. As he eats, he notices his thinking is getting way simpler than it used to be, wondering if his brain is turning into a monster's along with his body. But looking at his reflection with those sharp teeth, he realizes he doesn't mind the change one bit. On sits alone on the bloodstained stairs, finishing off his massive meal and thinking that this new life might actually suit him. But a second later, he lets out a heavy sigh while clutching his stomach, feeling a weird tightness in his gut. He can't believe his stomach is already growling again after eating 25 monsters, wondering if his body is just a bottomless pit now. On calls out for his status screen to see what's changed, spotting something new right away. It turns out his predation skill just hit level 3, and now he gets a natural health boost whenever his stomach is full, which is exactly the motivation he needs to head up to the next floor, since he knows more monsters mean more food for him. He reaches the top and peeks around the corner, seeing nothing but an empty stone hallway at first. On moves quickly and quietly through the corridors, checking every turn until he comes out into a much larger room. He thinks the layout looks a lot like the floors below, but then a sharp sound catches his ear and he spins around, finding 3 big orcs waiting for him, including an archer, all ranked E+, and looking like they're ready to start the next round. On ducks as an arrow flies right past his head, and looking at the orc's quiver, he notices the arrows aren't running out, leading him to crack his neck and decide he can't wait for the guy to empty his stock. So he's taking the archer out first. He moves like a total blur, jumping and weaving through the air to close the gap until he's right on top of the fighter, leaving the orc getting absolutely wrecked as blood sprays everywhere from a single massive hit that On lands with perfect focus. Things get even more chaotic as the orcs start roaring, but On doesn't miss a beat and slams right into the next one, wondering if he can really drop these guys with just one punch, which he proves a second later by decking another orc. On starts laughing with this pretty dark look on his face, thinking that if it's this simple the rest of the floor will be a breeze. He stops to think about how normal dungeons work. Usually you just find the boss at the end, win the fight, and use a magic circle to warp out. But since everything here is just E rank, he's convinced this is just a small-time dungeon not worth too much worry. He figures he should grind some more levels before the boss since he's fighting barehanded, but then a weird tingle hits him and he spins around. On feels a sudden surge of energy crackling all over his body, and it hits him immediately that this weird sensation is exactly what happens when he's about to evolve, which is confirmed when a system screen pops up offering him the choice between an ogre, a curse mummy, or a Kijin. He figures the options are all ogre types because he started as a ghoul, but either way he knows this choice is going to change everything, so he starts weighing his options, ruling out the ogre because they're too slow and considering the curse mummy since magic seems like a safe path. The Kijin option is the real mystery since it wasn't in any of his monster books. But as he tries to remember where he heard the name, his body suddenly spikes with an insane amount of pressure that catches him completely off guard, making him freak out as the light starts blinding him. He tries to tell the system to wait since he hasn't even picked yet, but the evolution forces itself forward and leaves him screaming as the power rips through him. Once the light dies down, On is left panting on the ground with a sharp, clawed hand, thinking that the pain this time was on a whole different level. But when he calls out his status and catches a glimpse of his new horns and markings, he's almost too shocked to speak. Looking at the massive jump in his stats, he just starts laughing to himself because he can't believe how much of a monster he's actually become. On grips his gear with his new clawed hand, feeling pumped and ready to go, he tells himself it's time for a little test run. He figures if the next room is a boss, he'll bail, but for now, he's just looking to find some orcs to mess with. As he runs through the dungeon halls, a group of monsters spots him coming from a distance, and it turns out he found exactly what he wanted. A whole squad of D-rank monsters is waiting, including an orc guard, a swordsman, a mage, and their general, making On think they actually look pretty tough. Instead of backing off, he activates his skills. His strength and speed stats go through the roof as he feels the power of his strong arm and quickness abilities kicking in. On gives them a wild grin and asks if they're ready for this. The orc squad holds their ground and gets into position, but as he looks them over, he's already calculating which one of them is going to be the biggest problem to take out. His eyes lock right on the orc general, who's standing there looking all serious and ready for a fight. Suddenly, On moves so fast he's basically a blur, zipping right through their formation before they can even react. The general can only watch in total shock, barely letting out a grunt as he realizes he's completely lost track of where On went. On puts his new strength to the test, smashing the orc mage into a wall with enough force to crack the stone, and he's honestly loving it. He realizes this evolution has made him way stronger than he ever was as a human, and he's doing all this damage with his bare hands. The remaining orcs are totally losing it as On thinks back to his old life. He was a C-rank adventurer, but that rank is usually meant for a full party of 4, meaning his old self had to be a master strategist just to take down a single D-rank monster alone. Now he's just tearing through them, and it's clear that combining his years of combat experience with this insane, new body makes him an absolute monster. He stands over the bodies with a dark grin, he's not even breaking a sweat. Looking at the mess he made, On figures he could probably take on an A-rank adventurer at this point. The last orc guard is left shaking behind its shield, so On starts to walk away, thinking the whole fight was actually a lot easier than he thought it would be, but then he stops and gives the last orc a scary look. He taunts the thing, telling it to come at him since he just finished off its entire squad. He asks the orc if it's even mad about its friends dying, wondering if orcs have any pride at all. On keeps taunting the last orc, telling it to man up and fight him, but the monster just stays on the ground making weird noises and eventually, he just loses interest. He says to forget it since he's not even feeling the hype of the fight anymore, so he turns his back and starts walking away. He tells the orc it can just spend the rest of its life shaking and running away like a coward, and he gives one last dark look over his shoulder, calling the thing a pig bastard before heading toward a massive set of wooden doors. He figures this has to be the boss room, and he stops for a second to get his head in the game. He tells himself to focus, knowing the boss is definitely going to be another orc, but he realizes the worst thing that could be behind that door is an orc king. Those things are a rank and way stronger than any normal monster, but he just shrugs and puts his hand on the wood. He knows there's no point in overthinking it since he won't know what he's up against until he sees it, so he yells for a charge and throws the heavy doors wide open. And as he takes his first step into the dark, he's honestly surprised by how massive the room actually is. On steps inside and is greeted by a huge, dimly lit hall filled with torches and the silhouettes of monsters waiting for him. He spots 3 beefy orc berserkers dual-wielding axes their C rank, which makes them way tougher than the ones he fought before. And just as he's sizing them up, he notices a massive shadow standing behind them. He's completely caught off guard by the sheer size of what's coming, and it turns out to be a B+ rank red ogre, a total mutant that towers over everything else with a giant poleaxe in its hand. Looking at the group, he realizes that even with his new Kijin strength, he can't just stand there and take hits or he's going to get wrecked, so he decides to play it smart. He triggers his strong arm and agility buffs to max out his stats, and as the energy flows through him, he makes a move. His plan is to clear out the berserkers as fast as possible so he can focus on a one-on-one fight with the big guy, and he charges in like a bullet, landing a massive punch right on the first orc's jaw before it can even swing an axe. The other orcs try to jump him, but he's moving too fast. He turns into a complete blur and slashes through them in a single breath. But then he sees something crazy. The red ogre doesn't even care about its own guys. It swings its massive axe, killing the last berserkers just to try and catch on in the blast. The red ogre doesn't care about its own team and swings that massive axe. It cleaves right through the orcs in the way, forcing on to duck low as the blade whistles over his head. He clenches his fist and keeps his eyes locked on the monster, even as a massive shadow drops over him and the ogre brings the axe crashing down like a meteor. The floor shatters into a million pieces, but On manages to roll through the dust and slides back across the stone floor to create some space. He admits to himself that if he takes even one direct hit from that thing, it's game over for him. So he stands up and takes a deep breath to steady his heart. He tells himself to stay calm and not let the pressure get to him while the ogre prepares for another charge. Gritting his teeth, On thinks back to some old advice his grandpa used to give him during training and remembers the old man shouting about how it's all about mindset. His grandpa's voice echoes in his head, telling him that as long as he doesn't get hit, he takes 0 damage, so On decides to just send it. He gets a wild grin on his face and shouts that it's time to go, pumping his energy up to the absolute limit before he turns into a total blur. He sprints circles around the massive ogre, his feet tapping against the floor so fast the monster can't even keep up with his movement, and before the big guy can react, On reaches out and grabs the handle of the giant axe with both hands. On moves like lightning and catches the ogre off guard, his blade carving a deep path through the monster's arm and sending blood flying across the floor while the big guy lets out a pained roar. On follows up immediately with a heavy slash across the ogre's chest, smirking and telling him he's got plenty of axes left to finish the job, so he rips his weapon through the ogre's head, practically splitting the top half of the monster's skull right open. He doesn't slow down for a second, calling the monster a pig while he delivers another clean strike to its neck. And as the ogre looks up in total shock, On drops down from the air with a brutal overhead swing. He yells that he's just getting started and charges back in as the ogre lets out one last scream. On delivers a massive final strike that cuts through the monster's defenses like they aren't even there and grabs hold of the beast's neck to steady himself. He's breathing heavy now, but his eyes stay locked on his target with a scary level of focus. The adrenaline is clearly hitting hard because he starts ranting, telling the ogre not to group him with the weaklings and threatening to turn the monster into a pile of meat for lunch if it doesn't step it up. Then he puts every bit of strength he has left into one final, massive swing that completely tears through the monster's body. The ogre finally hits the floor for good, steam rising from its broken body as the room goes still. On wipes the sweat from his face and sighs, glad that things have finally quieted down. On lets out a long, heavy breath as the adrenaline finally starts to fade. He looks over the mess he made and thinks he probably went a bit too far getting caught up in the moment. He knows his mouth gets pretty nasty when he's hyped up, and it's a habit he just can't seem to fix, so he sits there reflecting on the fight, thinking about how he got inside the ogre's guard to land those hits. He pushed his skills to the limit to win, but he realizes he'd be in real trouble if he hadn't had a weapon. Taking on a B-rank monster barehanded is just asking for a death wish, which makes him pull up his status screen to see where he stands. He spots something new right away and notices he's jumped all the way to level 23. On top of that, he's unlocked the appraisal skill, which lets him see the value and stats of any gear he finds. It's the exact skill the guy at the weapon shop told him would be super useful. While he's thinking about it, the ogre's massive body starts sinking into the floor. He wonders if dungeon bosses always get absorbed that fast, but then a bright light flashes in the middle of the room. He watches as something new appears right where the monster died, a giant treasure chest. On walks toward his prize, thinking that even though he didn't get to eat the ogre, this loot makes the whole fight worth it. On is hyped to see what's inside the boss chest. He leans in, wondering what kind of loot he's about to score, and pulls out a massive spiked club. He's shocked by the size of it, yelling about how huge the thing is as he decides to test out his new appraisal skill. His eye focuses on the heavy weapon, and suddenly stats pop up right in front of him. He's looking at a red ogre's iron club with 15 attack power and a special effect that wrecks enemy gear. On holds his head, feeling totally overwhelmed. He says things are going so well he can barely process it all, so he takes a second to think about how useful this skill really is. Since he's a monster now and can't go to town, being able to check gear himself is huge, especially with this new club. He isn't sure if 15 attack power is a lot, but a red rarity weapon that breaks armor is a massive upgrade. He looks over the rarity scale and realizes red is ultra rare status. It's the kind of high-tier loot people would kill each other for, which makes him curious about the rest of his stuff. He figures he'll check the magic bag his grandpa gave him a long time ago, but when the stats pop up he completely loses it. The bag is also red rarity, and he can't believe his grandpa just gave him something that legendary. On holds the bag, realizing he'd be filthy rich if he ever sold it. He just laughs though, saying there's no way he's letting go of it. He finishes up by the boss chest and looks across the room. Something catches his eye through the light and he spots a magic circle glowing on the floor. He figures that's probably the exit out of here, but he isn't leaving without his loot. He drags the orc berserker's body along, saying you can never have too much meat. While he's moving, he spots a weird round button sticking out of the wall. He stops and wonders what it could be. The more he looks at it, the more he wants to touch it. He says the shape just makes him really want to push it. He reaches out but hesitates for a second, thinking it might be a trap, which leads to him totally overthinking it. He groans and paces around before finally deciding he's just gonna go for it. He yells out that he's pressing it and slams the button. The floor immediately starts shaking like crazy, and a massive stone pillar rises up from the ground right in front of him. On looks down at a secret staircase he found, realizing the boss room wasn't the final stop after all. He admits he's way too curious to walk away, so he starts heading down. The old stone steps creak under his feet as he sneaks deeper into the dark. He peeks out from the end of the tunnel and totally freezes. Right in front of him is this massive hidden garden with a bridge and a pond. On spots, a small shrine sitting right in the middle of the water and wonders what a place like this is even doing here. He runs across the wooden bridge toward the center, noticing that something inside the shrine is glowing pretty bright. It's a strange, shiny orb. He leans in close, wondering if he just stumbled onto some kind of rare jewel. On reaches out and grabs it. He holds the orb up to the light, staring at it with wide eyes as he realizes the thing actually looks kind of tasty. He tells himself it's definitely not food, but then his stomach starts growling again. He tries to resist, but a voice in his head tells him to just eat it already. On looks for a second opinion from his zombie senior, who just shows up in his head giving him a huge thumbs up to go for it. On thinks back to how his zombie senior was the one who finally broke the chains of common sense for him, and he realizes that without those weird lessons, he wouldn't be the person he is today, so he decides to just go for it. He opens his mouth wide and swallows the glowing orb in one big gulp. Everything goes quiet for a second before a system message pops up confirming he just absorbed a dungeon core, and suddenly his chest starts glowing like crazy. The system announces that On is officially the new dungeon master and starts boosting his intelligence to make it fit his new role. On can't even process being a master before a voice from the shrine starts screaming at him for being an idiot. A round little pig with a bow tie pops out of the shrine, fuming and asking why he tried to eat it since it almost ended up as total waste. On just stands there with his jaw dropped, staring at the creature and wondering if he's actually talking to a stuffed animal, but the little guy just ignores him and says its name is Eris. Eris crosses its arms with a super proud look, explaining that it's not a toy, it's actually the dungeon core itself. On stares at the little creature in total disbelief. He really can't wrap his head around the fact that a stuffed animal is actually talking to him. Eris explains that it was stuck without the ability to move or speak until now, but things changed the moment On decided to eat it. On just takes it in, figuring that since humans are turning into monsters these days, a talking toy isn't even that weird, so he asks what a dungeon core is even supposed to be. Eris tells him it's fine that he's clueless and starts to break it down. The little pig explains that the core is what keeps the dungeon running when there isn't a master around, especially since a real master only shows up once every 100 years or so. On listens but gets straight to the point. He wants to know what powers he has now, and more importantly, if he can finally get out of this dungeon. Eris puts on a serious face and tells him it's time for a proper lesson on how his new life is going to work. It reveals that they are currently in the Fort Noir labyrinth, and as the dungeon master, On is now the absolute ruler and manager of the entire place. Eris goes on to explain that he can use dungeon points to create new rooms, spawn treasure, or even summon monsters. It even offers to handle all the boring management stuff if On gives it the okay. On is honestly blown away realizing that every dungeon he's ever seen was actually being run by someone behind the scenes. He asks how he even gets more points, and Eris explains that points are basically energy collected from any living thing that enters, moves around, or dies inside his territory. On thinks it sounds like a plan and gives Eris full authority to manage things, but first, he asks for some new clothes, specifically something that can hide his horns. Eris agrees that a small request like that is easy enough to handle. Eris starts sweating as it explains that it had the monster generator on autopilot because nobody ever visits. It didn't even realize a red ogre had spawned until the dungeon's points started running low. On is pretty annoyed and asks if this whole dangerous mess was the pig's fault, but he quickly asks if the ogre was absorbed just to get some points back. He mutters that he'll let it go since he's still in one piece, though Eris tells him he's got it a bit wrong. The little pig breaks down a diagram showing that once a monster is defeated, it can be collected and summoned all over again. On watches the process and nods along. It finally makes sense how the dungeon keeps its numbers up, and he looks at a chart of his own life from the last few days, going from dead to a zombie, then evolving all the way to a Kijin and now a dungeon master. He admits to himself that the title still doesn't feel real yet, but at the end of the day, having a safe spot to call home is more than enough for him. He watches Eris chatter away and thinks that even if his only companion is a talking stuffed toy, it's actually kind of nice to have someone to talk to. On suddenly realizes he has no idea what he looks like after his latest evolution. He figures he can use the water in the spring as a mirror to check out the damage. He tells Eris he's heading over to the spring for a minute, completely ignoring the pig as it yells that it still has way more things to explain. He makes it to the water's edge and leans over the railing to get a good look. He's not ready for what's staring back at him. On stares at his reflection in total shock, seeing a handsome guy with horns and white hair where his old face used to be. He can't believe his eyes and asks if this is even him or some complete stranger. Eris asks what he's staring at, but On can't even find the words because he looks so much younger now. He just stands there while the little pig brags about how cute and pretty its own form is. On just sighs and says he's glad the toy is happy with itself, but Eris changes the subject to ask about the clothes he's holding. On's face lights up as he tells the pig that he finally finished putting the outfit together, feeling pretty relieved to finally have something decent to wear since the new dark cloak looks like a solid, safe choice for a guy in his position. He checks himself out, and Eris watches him for a second before asking what the actual plan is moving forward. On tells him that he actually knows where another dungeon is hidden. He plans on getting some rest first, but after that, he's going to go raid the place, though Eris stops him to say there are still 2 more master abilities he needs to understand. On can't believe there's still more to learn, and the pig explains the first one is all about teleporting. He can move anywhere inside his own dungeon whenever he wants, and he can even warp back home from the outside in a split second, making the second skill just as important, which is a subordinate contract for scouting. If someone accepts his offer, his magic flows into them to create a permanent connection. Eris explains that On can now use a skill called telepathy, which catches the guy totally off guard. The pig adds that they can talk without even using words now, even if they aren't standing right next to each other, meaning On is still reeling from the surprise, but Eris just laughs and says he's been pulled into On's system too. A permanent connection has been formed between them now, so Eris mentions that anyone On signs a contract with will also be able to use those teleporting and return skills he talked about. It's a lot to take in, and On admits his brain is basically full from the massive info dump. He tells the pig he won't be able to remember another word if they keep going, so Eris agrees to save the rest of the explanation for later. On decides it's time to change, check his status one last time, and finally crash. Eris says he'll handle the rest by using their leftover points to build a decent bed for him. On stands out by the dungeon gate and lets out a massive yawn. He's completely wiped after everything that went down, and as the day finally ends, Eris tells him goodnight while On looks over his new stats. He's just relieved to finally have a safe place to call home and a chance to sleep for the first time in days. Sometime later, On's eyes snap open as he slowly starts to wake up. He's still lying in the grass, wondering for a second where he even is, but he sits up and the memories start coming back. He remembers eating the dungeon core and just passing out right there on the ground, and Eris chirps in to say it looks like he's finally awake. On stares at his new hand, and realizes that his evolution and everything else wasn't just a crazy dream. Eris lets him know he's been out cold for a solid 3 days, which makes On shout out the pig's name in total shock. On looks around the area and asks if Eris was the one who built this place. The little pig explains he put this room together right next to the core room so his master could finally get some decent sleep. And On thanks him for the help but says being called master is a little too weird, so he asks to just go by On. Eris is totally fine with that and says he's got it. Eris asks if the plan is to head out to another dungeon now. On confirms it but double-checks to see if leaving the place like this is actually a good idea, so Eris tells him it's no problem at all, like it's nothing to worry about. The pig explains that while the boss is away, he can just step in and manage everything as the core's representative. He also mentions that if On takes over more cores, he'll become the master of those dungeons too, and On decides he's going to head out immediately. He's confident since they can talk through their minds if anything happens, and he's already got his return skill ready for when he needs to come back home. Eris points out that the teleport circle to get outside is waiting in the core room. He tells On to stay safe out there, and On just gives a quick nod and says he's ready to go. Eris watches from the doorway as On steps onto the glowing circle. He gives a final wave before the magic kicks in and sends him on his way. Down by the riverbank, the water flows quietly past the stone edge, and On stands there looking at the current. He recognizes the river and wonders if this is the exact spot where he got washed away before. He knows the way out from here, but he decides to pull his hood up just to be safe. He doesn't want anyone spotting his new look while he's heading toward his next destination. He's feeling pretty hyped up as he sets his sights on reaching the verdant plains. He takes off at a full sprint through the thick forest, zooming past old skeletons and trees without slowing down for a second. The trees finally thin out as he makes it to the edge of the verdant plains, a huge open area stretching out in front of him. On figures, he might as well get some work in while he's traveling, so he decides to hunt whatever monsters show up along the way. Just as he's walking, he senses something in the brush. A giant rabbit with a sharp horn on its head suddenly lunges out at him. It's a D-rank one-horned rabbit, but it's over in a flash. On draws his blade and cuts it down midair like it's nothing. He doesn't stop there either. A group of D-rank goblins shows up next, but he just tears right through them with a few quick strikes. On is just walking along when he hears something rustling in the tall grass. He stops in his tracks and asks himself what that noise is, looking over toward the bushes to see what's going on. He catches a glimpse of some movement and realizes that something is definitely happening just ahead of him, so he takes a closer look and sees a whole pack of C-rank gray wolves running together. He identifies them out loud, noting that it's a full pack of wolves, and then he spots what they're after. He watches from the trees, seeing a small fox magic beast standing its ground and growling as the wolves start to circle around it. The little fox doesn't even flinch. It actually lunges forward and bites one of the much larger wolves right in the face, while On watches the whole thing go down. He's pretty surprised by the little guy, saying that the fox has a ton of guts for being so small and noticing how it refuses to give up. Even though it's outnumbered by enemies that are way stronger, the fox keeps up the fight, which makes On clench his fist as he watches. He decides right then that he actually likes the little creature's style, so he decides to step in and help out. He cracks a grin and feels his agility skills kick in, getting ready to move faster than the wolves can even see, and he blurs into action like a total flash. He calls out a quick greeting as he flies past the pack, leaving the wolves completely stunned. On leans in with a wild look in his eyes, casually asking the little fox magic beast if it needs a hand. The fox looks up with big, tired eyes and lets out a soft whimper, looking totally beat up but hopeful as it actually bows its head in respect. On realizes the little guy is pretty smart for figuring out right away that he isn't an enemy. He turns to the wolves and tells them he's sorry for crashing their hunt, but offers to let them walk if they don't pick a fight. The wolves aren't interested in a deal, they just stare him down, baring their teeth and growling at him. One of the wolves lunges forward with a loud snarl, but On just stands his ground and grips his heavy club, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He tells them they're way too slow as he swings, absolutely wrecking the pack in a blur of motion and laughing. He stands over the mess and notes he didn't even use his strong arm skill for that. Turns out his attack power is way higher than he expected, and then the little fox makes a happy sound and starts nuzzling against his leg. On looks down, a bit surprised that the creature is being so friendly so fast. He pets the fox and notices it's a rare one with 2 tails. He figures he should help it out, so he starts digging through his magic bag for a healing potion. On digs through his stuff for a second before finally grabbing a healing potion from his magic bag. He pours the medicine right over the little fox's head. It's shaking like crazy, but On can't help thinking how cute the thing is as he realizes it's out here all alone. The fox looks up, eyes literally sparkling after being healed, and that's when On decides to ask the little guy if it wants to be his partner. He gives a big, toothy grin and reaches out a hand, telling the fox it should just come along with him. The fox doesn't hesitate for a second. It lets out a loud, happy bark to show it's totally down for the idea. Suddenly, On feels a weird spark. He looks pretty surprised and says it feels like they just clicked or connected somehow. He admits he's never done this before, so he isn't 100% sure, but it definitely looks like the familiar contract actually worked. On gives the fox a friendly pat on the head and tells it he's glad to have it on the team, then asks what its name is. The fox just lets out a soft whine. Since it doesn't have a name yet, On decides to go with Kinu. And then he explains that his grandpa used to talk about a beautiful fabric from his hometown that matches the fox's fur color. Kinu loves the new name and barks happily. On looks down at Kinu and tells him it's time to get moving, but first they need to focus on getting the little guy's level up. He calls out for them to start, and Kinu immediately goes to work, tearing through monsters with some seriously fast attacks. On is pretty impressed and tells Kinu he's actually tough, thinking the fox might have even handled those wolves if the odds weren't so stacked, when suddenly a bright light starts to surround the fox. On realizes Kinu is already starting to evolve, so he tells him to go for it while he handles the guard duty. He tells the little guy to just relax and let the process happen. Light swirls around Kinu as his fur starts to glow and his tails grow out. And just like that, he stands there looking way more powerful than before. On crouches down and says the evolution looks like a total success, then asks Kinu if he's feeling good enough to move. Kinu gives a firm nod to show he's ready, and On is definitely stoked to see it. He points the way forward and says they should keep heading toward their goal while grinding out more levels as they go, and Kinu barks back, totally on board. The two of them head out across the open fields together. Kinu moves like a blur, catching a horned rabbit completely off guard before it can even react. He hits it with a massive burst of energy that blows the target away. The monster slams hard into the dirt, and On notes that it was definitely a magic attack. Kinu looks pretty pleased with himself as they stand over the fresh kill. On laughs and asks the fox if he's just naturally that strong, thinking to himself how crazy it is that something so cute can be such a beast. Kinu just barks back with total confidence. Suddenly, the sound of a carriage fills the air as someone comes rushing toward them at full speed, kicking up a huge cloud of dust as they come to a sudden stop. The rattling is so loud it makes On stop what he's doing. He holds up the rabbit he just caught and wonders what all the noise is about while Kinu looks on. A tiny figure hops out from the carriage and tells On he's incredibly strong, then asks if he's some kind of professional tamer. The little guy runs over and apologizes for the late introduction, explaining that his name is Baru Baru and he's out here working as a traveling merchant. On thinks the guy is adorable and asks what kind of beastman he's supposed to be. Baru Baru seems a little taken aback, but explains that he's a lesser panda. The merchant mentions that On doesn't seem very shocked to see him, and On just replies that it's probably because he's used to meeting beastmen by now. On asks if there's something the merchant needs from them, and Baru Baru admits that he's sorry for the trouble, but he actually has a favor to ask. Baru Baru speaks up and asks if he can buy the meat from the horned rabbit On just caught. On holds the carcass up, looking a little surprised that the merchant is specifically asking for the meat rather than the more valuable parts. He asks if the little guy isn't interested in the fur or the horn instead. Baru Baru looks pretty down and admits that there's actually a much bigger problem going on. He explains that his hometown, Nyaharu village, is just a bit further southeast. Some seriously strong monsters showed up and surrounded the place, making it impossible for anyone to hunt. So now the whole village is starving, and he's just trying to bring back as much food as he can possibly carry. On listens to the story and realizes the merchant is on a rescue mission for his people, so he just hands the rabbit over and tells Baru Baru to take it for free. The merchant is completely shocked by the gesture, but On insists it's fine since they're clearly in a bind. On gives him a big grin and says that instead of paying, Baru Baru can just help him out whenever he finds himself in trouble down the road. The little merchant is so moved by the guy's kindness that he actually starts tearing up, overwhelmed by the help. He promises he'll definitely find a way to pay him back and asks for his name. On introduces himself and tells him it's good to meet him, while Kinu lets out a loud bark that sounds a lot like he's trying to join in on the introduction. On thinks it's hilarious that the fox is trying to say his name and asks if they can load the rabbit onto the carriage. Even though he's still got space in his magic bag, he figures it's easier this way, and Baru Baru happily leads the way. Baru Baru decides that from here on out he's going to call the guy Onsan, and he starts getting ready to load up all the food. He's completely blown away by how much the carriage can actually fit, but On just gives him a look and tells him to keep that a secret. The little merchant bows as low as he can, thanking him for the help and wishing the group a safe trip. On just waves him off and says they'll catch him later. Once the merchant starts heading out, On turns his attention back to the task at hand. He tells Kinu they should probably get moving too, and the fox lets out a quick bark as they watch the carriage disappear. The two of them head deeper into the quiet mountain trails where the air is cool, and eventually, On stops by a pile of rocks. He tells the fox that the place should be right around here, and he starts poking around the entrance. He lets out a shout when he finally sees it. Hidden inside the small cave is a glowing magic circle etched right into the floor, making Kinu tilt his head in confusion. On notices the look and asks the fox if he's wondering how he even knew a spot like this existed, so he explains the whole story. It turns out he just happened to find the place by total luck the last time he was passing through the area. On looks at Kinu and thinks the fox has a look that says he finally understands. Just then, a thought hits him and he reaches out to Eris through a telepathic link to see if the little guy is listening. Eris answers right away, asking what he wants now. On explains that he just finished the contract with the fox and asks if there's a way to check its stats. Eris says he already knows about the deal and even compliments the name Kinu. The little pig tells him he just has to touch the familiar to see the info. On is pretty stoked about that and thanks him for the tip. Turning back to his new partner, On asks Kinu if he can check out his status for a second and reaches his hand out. He starts petting the fox, thinking about how cute the little guy is before finally calling out for the status screen. The window pops up right in front of him. On is actually surprised he can see everything so clearly and he can't help but say that these stats and skills are totally insane. He stares at the screen for a moment because it finally makes sense why Kinu could hold his own against a whole pack of gray wolves. The fox's HP and endurance were high from the start, but the really crazy part is his intelligence stat. On realizes that's why Kinu is way better at dropping enemies with magic than just using regular attacks. On notes that Kinu feels like a magic user who can actually hold his own on the front lines. The fox looks up a bit confused, so On just smiles and tells the little guy he's definitely giving him a compliment and starts thinking that since Kinu is his familiar now, they might be able to pick which stats to level up together. He looks down at the fox and suggests that from now on, Kinu should focus on wanting to raise his intelligence as much as possible. He figures that if they focus on that, things will probably turn out even better for them. So he asks Kinu if he can try using his healing magic on himself just to see what happens. Kinu gives a quick bark and gets to work while On keeps petting him, and then a bright light flashes. On leans in to check the numbers and completely loses it when he sees a massive 200-point recovery pop up. He starts wondering if the amount of healing Kinu does is actually tied to that intelligence stat. If that's the way it works, then he can't help but wonder what Kinu is going to turn into once he starts evolving later on. The kid's honestly thinking his fox might end up becoming some kind of legendary monster, and he just keeps telling Kinu how incredible he is. Kinu looks pretty happy about the praise, while On tells him that getting that strong is a goal the two of them are going to hit together. On looks at his new partner and tells Kinu that they should aim for the legendary rank together. And Kinu barks back happily while wagging his tail, making On give a big, confident smile as he suggests they finally go raid the dungeon. He reaches out to the magic circle and the two of them teleport right into the stone hallways. Kinu looks around the dark area and On explains that this is a dungeon where tons of monsters show up, which makes it the perfect spot for them to level up. He tells the fox that for now, they're just going to take down everything they see and eat any monster meat that looks good. On asks Kinu if he can actually handle eating monster meat, and the little guy just barks excitedly. So On says it's time to move and starts heading deeper into the hallway when an E-rank gray wolf suddenly jumps out of the shadows. Kinu doesn't hesitate for a second and lunges forward, landing a hit so fast that On can't even help but be a little surprised. On watches his partner and figures the fox was probably venting some serious steam after those wolves jumped him earlier. But now Kinu looks totally refreshed as they walk through the stone halls. On realizes they're actually standing right where he first found his magic sword, Flam. It feels like forever ago when he was still a normal human hanging out by treasure chests, and he can't believe how much he's evolved since then. Curious about his progress, he calls out for his status screen to show up, and it pops right up in front of him, confirming that he's already made it to level 29. On starts doing the math, he turned into a ghoul at 10 and a Kijin at 20, so hitting 30 probably means another big change is coming. He looks over at the fox and finally comes clean, admitting he's actually a monster too. Kinu looks pretty shocked to hear that, so On explains the situation, telling him that his next evolution is likely going to happen any minute now. He warns Kinu that he'll be completely stuck and unable to move for a few minutes while the evolution happens, and asks the little guy to look out for him. Kinu doesn't hesitate for a second, barking back happily to let On know he's got things covered. On looks at Kinu and can tell the fox is basically saying he's got things under control, which makes him feel a lot better about their contract as they keep running through the dungeon tunnels, feeling totally relaxed until some E-rank goblins jump out. Kinu handles them like a pro while On stays sharp and suddenly feels that familiar tingle hitting his whole body. He grits his teeth because he knows the big moment is finally here, and right as he's about to change, a pack of E-rank gray wolves moves in and surrounds them on all sides. On tells Kinu the evolution is starting and that he has to leave the rest of the fight to him, so the little fox gives a serious nod. He's ready to hold the line no matter what. Kinu barks and leaps right at the wolves to keep them away from On while the evolution takes over. But then the system screen pops up and catches on by surprise. It's telling him to pick an attribute, and since he met the right conditions, he actually gets to choose two. On realizes he didn't prepare for this at all, and starts panicking about how much time he has left to pick between water, wood, dark, or lightning. On decides to just go with his gut and picks his attributes, and the system confirms it immediately, but then a new screen pops up telling him he has to pick a specific evolution path too. He sees options for a human, a doppelganger, or a lightning ogre, and he's totally blown away that there are even more layers to this. He's especially shocked to see human on the list, but he quickly decides the doppelganger path is a hard pass. On stares at the lightning ogre option and realizes this definitely wasn't in any of the monster guides he read, which makes him feel even more pressured as he tries to figure out the right move. He starts getting frustrated, but then he stops himself, remembering the promise he just made to Kinu to stay strong and keep moving forward together. On looks at the screen with a new sense of focus, realizing the answer has been right there the whole time. He knows exactly what he has to pick. He chooses the lightning ogre, and a massive burst of energy fills the area while Kinu stands over a defeated wolf, watching the transformation happen. After the light fades, On ends up face down on the ground from the exhaustion. Kinu runs over barking happily to check on him, and On manages to whisper the little fox's name as he looks up with two black horns on his head and a smile, telling Kinu he's alright because the process didn't actually hurt as much as he expected. On stands up and notices he feels a bit taller than before, wondering if his perspective changed, while Kinu just barks up at him, happy to see him back on his feet. On tells the little fox he needs a few minutes to check his new status, and asks him to keep an eye out for any danger, and Kinu barks back to let him know he's got it covered. On takes a deep breath and calls out for his status screen, and when it pops up he nearly loses it. He stares at the numbers in shock, realizing just how much stronger he's actually become since the evolution, but the biggest surprise is seeing that he can finally use magic. He scrolls through the list, seeing how much everything has changed, and honestly the new skills he's seeing are nothing short of insane. He starts going through them one by one to see what they actually do. He sees a skill called Sky Tread that lets him jump a second time in the air, plus a lightning attack that lets him fire off 3 charges at once, which is already a lot, but then he sees Swift Thunder. It's a skill that straight up doubles his strength and speed for 5 minutes, and it even stacks with another skill called Charge that adds a percentage of his magic power to his physical stats. On stops and starts doing the math on his fingers, realizing that if he uses them in the right order, his strength will jump nearly 3 times, and his speed will more than double. He starts sweating a bit, wondering if he's actually ended up becoming too strong for his own good. On leans against the dungeon wall and rethinks things, realizing that he might actually have it backwards about being too strong. He gets this intense look in his eyes and tells himself that he still isn't satisfied, this much power isn't nearly enough yet. He thanks Kinu for the help and says they'll test out the new skills once they find a bigger space, then suggests they head for the second floor. He clears the halls with his club but eventually hits a dead end. 2 hours go by and he's still at it, smashing through every monster that gets in his way like they're made of paper. He finally finishes the sweep and takes a second to wipe the sweat off his forehead while the monster remains dissolved behind him. Moving on, he sees the stairs and tells Kinu that they can finally head down to the second floor of the dungeon. He walks through a doorway and stops when he notices a bunch of eyes watching him from the shadows of the next room. The place is crawling with goblins and gray wolves. Turns out he just walked right into a massive monster room. On doesn't even look worried, saying a crowd like this is basically a joke for him now while Kinu barks, ready to jump in. Kinu is totally hyped up for the fight, looking at On and asking if he can be the one to take them down. On gives him the green light, saying he gets it, but tells the little guy he'll jump in to help if things get too dangerous. He tells Kinu to just go wild and do his thing, so the fox barks and charges right into the middle of the room. Kinu is way too fast for them, weaving around the orcs and their spears like it's a game, making them look slow while On watches from the back and notices Kinu heading straight for the wall, making him wonder if the fox has a real plan. Kinu barks again as he jumps into the air, gathering all his energy for a big move. A massive blast goes off, and On realizes Kinu used area of effect magic after luring the whole group into one spot. The fox looks pretty proud of himself, and On can't help but tell him that he's actually doing a great job. The room goes quiet as On looks at all the defeated monsters, realizing Kinu handled the entire crowd by himself. On is honestly blown away that the little guy took no damage, and he's even more surprised Kinu can plan out a fight so well. On gives Kinu some props, telling him he did exactly what he expected while the little fox barks back. He notices Kinu starting to glow and wonders if the little guy is actually evolving again already. The fox just lies there on the floor, letting the light take over as the evolution process starts. On asks Kinu to pull up his status screen, really curious to see what kind of changes happen this time. He pets Kinu while looking at the stats, seeing his race change to Sky Fox, and he's got a huge boost to his intelligence. On points out a new skill called Wisdom, telling Kinu they should test out some magic attacks in the next room. He tells the fox to keep an eye on his own status from now on, so he can start coming up with his own plans for the fights. On stands back up and grabs his club, ready to get back to work after the quick break. He starts running toward the next area, telling Kinu it's his turn to test out a brand new skill. On gets a real serious look on his face, focusing everything he's got on whatever is waiting for them up ahead. On and Kinu step out of the doorway and into a massive open field. For a second he thinks they're back outside, but he quickly realizes that's not the case, because even though everything is super bright, there's no sun in the sky, making it obvious they're still stuck deep inside the dungeon. On figures finding the next floor in a place this big is going to be a total pain, but just then, Kinu starts growling at something nearby. It turns out a pack of D-rank black wolves is waiting for them, and On thinks these guys are the perfect targets for a little test. He tells himself it's go time, facing down the 3 wolves as they prepare to pounce. On holds out his hand and charges up his energy, calling out his new lightning ball spell as sparks start flying everywhere. He sends the attack flying, using a specific type of magic that lets him target 3 different enemies at the exact same time. The bolts of electricity slam right into the wolves, hitting them with a massive burst of energy that lights up the whole area. The wolves are still standing despite the smoke, and On realizes he's not going to finish them off with just one move. But then he notices something weird. The electricity is still buzzing around the wolves, leaving them completely dazed and unable to move. On watches the wolves twitching from the shock, realizing they aren't moving right because his new magic just hit them with a status effect. He thinks this is huge since it'll make every fight way easier, and he looks over to Kinu, asking if the little fox saw how well that worked. The effect wears off and the wolves start moving normally again, so On keeps his guard up and prepares for the final push. He decides it's time to wrap this up once and for all, charging straight at the pack as they snap their jaws at him. He triggers his thunderclap skill, instantly doubling his speed and power as he tears through the wolves like they're nothing. Kinu's eyes are practically sparkling with excitement, and the little fox looks up at him, wondering what he thought of that performance. On just gives a confident smirk, telling Kinu that his partner is clearly on a whole different level. Looking at the aftermath, he figures he should probably save that lightning combo for the boss, since he's already breezing through everything else. Moving further into the field, he spots a massive tower standing tall in the distance, and he wonders what kind of building that could be. As he gets closer to the stone structure, he notices a heavy set of doors at the bottom, making him think he finally found the entrance to the boss room. On stares at the tower ahead with a smirk, looking like he's finally ready to get down to business. He finds the entrance guarded by a group of C-rank trolls and greater wolves, realizing these guys aren't going to let him just walk through. He knows trolls can heal themselves fast, so he figures that if his hits aren't heavy enough, he'll just be wasting his time. On looks over and tells Kinu to take care of the wolves, trusting the little fox can handle that side of the field. Kinu barks and runs off to distract the pack, while On charges straight into the middle of the giant trolls. He starts talking trash to get them riled up, telling the big guys that if they can survive a minute, they should just give up and run. The trolls completely lose their cool and let out a massive roar before one of them lunges straight at him. On triggers his charging skill, and suddenly his club is covered in sparks, giving his strength and speed a massive boost. He swings the electrified weapon with a shout, and it tears through a troll's shoulder like it's absolutely nothing. Watching the monster struggle, he notices the wound isn't closing up, so he mocks the guy, telling him to hurry up and try healing. On goes on the offensive, shouting that these guys won't even last a single minute against him as he tears through the first monster's defense, shattering its massive club and leaving a huge explosion of sparks in his wake. The troll screams out in pain, while On slides across the grass, already repositioning himself for the next hit. He doesn't give them a second to breathe, swinging his spiked club in a heavy arc that catches the monster right in the face. He looks back as the second one hits the dirt, calmly noting to himself that there's only one of them left. On decides to switch things up and asks if he should just use his bare hands before absolutely unloading on the last guy with a fast blur of punches. He stands over the mess and sighs, thinking 12 seconds for 3 trolls was way too fast since he actually expected them to be a challenge. He turns his attention to Kinu, who's currently facing down the pack of wolves on her own. Seeing the wolves close in makes him panic for a second and yell out Kinu's name, but he stops himself mid-step and clenches his fist. He realizes that if he runs over to save her now, he's just being overprotective and not letting her grow. Kinu holds her own as a spinning blur of energy slams into a wolf, sending it flying, but the fight has clearly taken a bit of a toll on her. Another wolf tries to catch her off guard from behind, but she senses it immediately and lets out a massive howl that blasts the beast backward. On watches from the sidelines, whispering Kinu's name as he sees just how much she's grown. He runs over and tells her she did an amazing job. He suggests they take a quick breather before the boss fight, but then he spots something. Right in front of the tower doors sits a treasure chest. Inside, he finds a pair of rare earrings that can hide his stats from others. He asks Kinu if he can keep them. On sees Kinu's MP is finally back to full, so he tells her it's time to get moving. Kinu gives a quick bark ready for whatever is behind the door. On puts his hand on the heavy wood and pushes it open, revealing two massive monsters waiting inside. On realizes he's looking at a B+ rank horsehead and bullhead standing in their way. He tells Kinu these guys are going to be a pain, so they have to take them one by one. He decides to handle the horsehead first and asks Kinu to keep the bullhead busy, using her magic. Kinu nods to show she understands, and On yells for them to go as he sprints forward. He throws out a lightning ball right at the horsehead, catching the monster completely by surprise. As he closes the gap, On realizes the creature is actually moving, a lot faster than he expected. The horsehead swings its sword down with incredible force, but On manages to meet the strike head-on, their weapons clashing with a massive burst of energy. On realizes this guy is on a whole different level. He's supposed to be the same rank as a red ogre, but the horsehead monster is clearly way stronger, and what's worse is that On's strike didn't even leave a scratch on its blade. He starts wondering if he's dealing with some kind of rare unique variant, so he grits his teeth and leans into the clash. The monster just stares him down with those empty eyes while their weapons are locked together. But On finds an opening and throws a heavy kick right into the horsehead's gut to shove it back. He's about to follow up when he hears a weird noise that stops him cold. He looks around, trying to figure out where that sound just came from, and that's when he sees Kinu collapsed on the ground. He panics and shouts her name, rushing over to grab her as she lies there completely limp. He asks if she's okay while pulling her clothes, then he quickly pulls up her status screen to see what's going on. It turns out she's just fainted, which is a relief, but he's still pretty worried about her. Even if the screen says she's fine, seeing her like this is tough, she's totally out of it and just needs some rest. On stays by Kinu's side for a second, whispering her name. He gently tells her to just stay there and rest for a bit while he grits his teeth, looking completely furious. He growls under his breath that he isn't going to let any of this slide, and he taps into his power, activating his lightning garb and thunderclap skills all at once. He's mad at the monsters for what they did to Kinu, but he's even more pissed at himself for underestimating how strong they actually were. So he looks at them with this terrifying, murderous look in his eyes. He yells at the monsters that they're just damn livestock and they better not think they're getting an easy death today. He rushes in and slams into the bull monster before jumping back to trigger his electric jade skill. A massive pillar of lightning crashes down from above, and On follows it up by smashing his club into the ground with so much force the whole floor just starts falling apart. He uses his skywalk skill to stay mobile, basically jumping off the air to keep his momentum going while he picks his next target. He spots the horse-headed monster and calls out to it, calling the thing a horse bastard to get its attention, but before the monster even knows what's happening, On is already standing right behind it. The monster tries to react, but On just gives it a cold stare and tells the thing it shouldn't be looking away. On's hit connects with insane power, sending the horse-headed monster Mizuki flying across the room. The thing can't even find its footing as it slams hard into the back wall, shattering the stone on impact. On lands back on the ground and turns his head to check on the damage, seeing both of the massive guards totally out for the count, one stuck in the wall and the other face down in a crater. The crazy intensity finally starts to leave his body, and he takes a second to just breathe. But as he stands over the monster he just trashed, he remembers why he was so mad in the first place. He says Kinu's name, and he looks over at her with a worried face, asking if she's doing okay after taking that huge hit. Before she can even answer, a bright light starts shining from her direction, and it's so intense that it makes him stop in his tracks. He calls out to her again and starts running toward the glow, and he quickly pulls up his interface, shouting for a status check to see what's going on with her. He sees that she's already reached level 30, which makes him wonder if she's actually starting to evolve right in front of him. The glow fades away, and Kinu is left sitting there in a brand new humanoid form. She looks down at her hands, still a bit dazed from the sudden change while she slowly blinks her eyes open. On is standing right there, completely frozen, as he asks if it's really her. But she doesn't answer right away, she just rubs her eyes sleepily like she's waking up from a long nap and softly says her own name. She holds onto her long, flowing white hair and gives him a small smile, looking totally peaceful until On suddenly realizes the situation and starts panicking. He turns bright red and yells about how she doesn't have any clothes on. He moves fast, shouting Kinu's name as he rips off his own black cloak and tosses it over her to cover her up. Once she's wrapped in the giant fabric, he turns his back to her and tells her that should be fine for now, even though he thinks the oversized look is actually pretty cute. He spots a treasure chest sitting nearby and thinks they just got incredibly lucky, finding it right after the fight is perfect. He runs over and starts frantically grabbing at the chest, praying out loud that some clothes for Kinu will actually be inside. It's not quite what he expected, but some top-tier Japanese-style gear pops out. It's a powerful set of red and black clothes once worn by a strong ogre. On looks over the gear they found and realizes it's definitely made for a guy, so Kinu won't be able to wear it after all. Since his own clothes are pretty much shredded from the fight, he decides he might as well use the new set himself, and Kinu just nods along. On starts changing into the new outfit while Kinu looks away. She spots a weird button on the wall and wonders what it does. Once he's fully dressed, On feels a bit self-conscious and mentions he looks like his grandpa, then asks Kinu what she thinks of the new look. Kinu doesn't say much, she just looks at him and says his name, clearly feeling some kind of way about how he looks now. While On is still figuring out his outfit, Kinu presses the button and some stone stairs suddenly open up in the floor, which totally catches him off guard. On gets hyped and tells Kinu she did an amazing job finding the way, since that's likely the path leading straight to the dungeon's core. Kinu looks super happy to be praised as she blushes, and On tells her it's time for them to head down there together. She follows his lead as they start heading down the steps, both of them ready to see what's waiting at the bottom. The two of them make it to the end of the stairs, but the light is so blindingly bright that On has to shield his eyes to see anything. On and Kinu step out of the stone tower and find themselves on a high staircase. The sun is shining through the leaves of a massive tree right in front of them, lighting up the whole area as they walk down into the courtyard. On stops when he sees something glowing behind some curtains. He wonders what it could be and realizes he's looking at the dungeon core. It's sitting right there on top of a stone shrine, glowing with this soft light that draws them both in. On doesn't waste any time. He reaches into the shrine, grabs the core, and opens his mouth wide as he swallows the thing whole. Kinu looks completely shocked as a huge burst of energy starts radiating from On's chest, and system messages start popping up everywhere. It confirms he successfully absorbed the core, he's officially the new dungeon master now, and his intelligence is shooting up to levels he's never had before. On wonders what kind of personality this core actually has, but before he can finish the thought, a bright light explodes from the shrine and someone starts screaming at the top of their lungs. A weird, smoky shape starts rising up into the air. It turns out to be this grumpy-looking wolf zombie plushie. On is pretty surprised by the creature's appearance, but he doesn't let it slide. He grabs the little guy by the neck and tells him that as the dungeon master, he's giving an order. He needs the plushie to use dungeon points to get some clothes for Kinu right now. On gets in the plushie's face and tells him not to be cheap with the dungeon points. He wants Kinu to have an outfit that matches his own style, and Kinu thinks that sounds like a great idea. The little guy starts sweating, wiping his face with a cloth while he gives in. He tells On he hears him loud and clear and will make it happen. A massive treasure chest appears out of nowhere and starts rattling like crazy on the floor. A high-end yukata dress pops out. It's got a solid 15 defense and a rare red rating, basically a masterpiece from a famous craftsman that any girl would want. On can tell the quality is top-notch. He tells Kinu to take the new gear and go change outside immediately. Kinu is glowing with excitement, thinking the dress is super cute as she heads off to get ready. While she's gone, the plushie acknowledges that On is definitely the new boss of this dungeon. On tells him to just call him by his name and introduces Kinu properly. The plushie stands tall and introduces himself as Eris, explaining that he's the actual core of this dungeon, Prenzvelt. On reaches out to shake his tiny paw. He tells Eris it's good to meet him, but then mentions he's actually running another dungeon called Fornoir on the side. Eris is actually pretty surprised to hear that. He tells On he can feel the energy connection to the other place coming off him, which makes things a bit more interesting. Eris puts on a little hat and grabs a book, asking if he should walk through the new master skills. On tells him to go for it, and the little guy gets right to work. Eris starts going over the new master skills, explaining that 2 major abilities have been added to the system. On listens closely as the plushie identifies them as Dungeon Transfer and Dungeon Sync Transfer is pretty straightforward. It lets On and his followers move instantly between any dungeons he's in charge of. It's basically a fast travel system for the whole crew, and then there's Sync, which is even better. It lets him swap monsters and furniture between locations, and even shares the total pool of dungeon points across the board so everything is connected. Eris wraps up the quick lesson, and On asks if this place has a solid amount of points stashed away. Eris confirms they're sitting on a good amount, but when the little guy offers a deep dive into the mechanics, On tells him to rain check. He's leaving the day-to-day management here to Eris, so he tells Eris to just coordinate with her. On's got a few big plans of his own brewing, but he knows they're going to take some time to set up. He's not trying to rush into anything crazy just yet, so he tells Eris to just keep his head down and focus on banking as many points as he can for the time being. Eris gets the memo and asks where the boss wants to crash for the night. On decides to use the new transfer to head back to Fornoir for a bit, promising to check back in later. Just then, Kinu shows up in her new dress looking like a literal angel. She's glowing as she thanks On, totally hyped that she gets to stay by his side looking this good. On introduces her to Eris, and she gives the little core a polite bow. On's just happy to see her so cheerful, so he laughs it off and asks her if he can check her updated status for a second. On reaches out and pats Kinu on the head as she closes her eyes, telling him she understands. He brings up her status window to see what they're working with now. Her race has officially changed to Sky Fox, and the numbers are actually wild. On sweating just looking at it, her attack magic is through the roof, her defense is up, and she can even heal herself now. It's like as long as she's got mana, she's a walking cheat code. He notices the specific skill that lets her take this form is called humanization. It lets her swap between her fox and girl forms at will, but On's still trying to wrap his head around how her level shot up so fast. He wonders if they're splitting experience points somehow, but he figures there's no point overthinking it right now, so he just comes to one simple conclusion. Kinu is super cute, and she's also basically a beast in a fight. He tells her the check is done, and she's gotten insanely strong. Kinu's not planning on stopping here though. She says she's gonna keep getting even stronger, and On's all for it. Still, he tells her they need to head back to Fornoir to crash for the night. She's gone through 3 whole evolutions in one day, so he knows she has to be totally wiped out. Kinu nods her head, and On gives the signal that it's time to move out. They activate the interdungeon transfer at the shrine, and in a flash of light they're gone. On and Kinu step through the gate and find themselves back at the dungeon shrine. Eris flies over to welcome them home, and On's glad to see the little guy again. He tells Eris the transfer went perfect and introduces Kinu, explaining she's actually a fox beast just using a skill to look human. Kinu gives a polite greeting, and Eris seems pretty happy to meet her. Eris goes on about how cute she is and starts acting all high and mighty, so On just asks if he can whip up a room for her to stay in. He tells Kinu to just focus on getting some sleep for now. They can worry about all the details once she's rested up and awake. As they're about to head off, Kinu stops him and says his name. She tells him she actually wants to stay in the same room as him, which totally catches him off guard. On starts panicking and suggests they at least put 2 beds side by side, but Kinu's not having it and shuts him down immediately. He tries to tell her that's probably going a bit too far, but she just admits she's too scared to sleep alone after everything that happened. Kinu looks pretty down as she admits she's just terrified of being left all by herself again, then looks up and asks if wanting to stay with him is really that bad. On gets all flustered and tries to argue against it, but he's clearly losing the battle as he starts wondering out loud if it might actually be fine. Eris jumps in with a wink, telling On that making sure his subordinates feel safe and secure is basically Master 101. And On just sighs, realizing the little pig guy is right and there's no real way around it anymore. He finally gives in and tells Kinu they can just share the room, which makes her ears pop up in total surprise. She gets this huge look of relief on her face and softly agrees, finally looking like she can actually relax for once. They settle into a big bed surrounded by flowers, and Kinu whispers a quiet goodnight to him as they drift off, but a few minutes later, Kinu clings to him in her sleep, catching On completely off guard while she stays totally passed out. As they sleep, Kinu starts drifting back into her memories, thinking about how her life started out in the middle of a snowy field. She remembers being surrounded by a whole pack of fox magic beasts just like her, back before everything changed. Kinu thinks back to the pack she used to live with back when everyone had white fur and a single tail just like the snow, and she was exactly the same as everyone else. But then, everything changed on that one day when her fur started turning a light golden color and her single tail split into 2. She had no idea what was going on, but by the time she woke up, she looked completely different from the rest of her pack. Suddenly, one of the other foxes lunges at her and bites down hard, making her cry out in pain. The pack tells her she isn't one of them anymore, and Kinu asks why they're doing this since they were just hunting together yesterday, trying to tell herself she's still the same as them, even though deep down she knows things have changed. She realizes that if she stays there, her own family is eventually going to kill her. Kinu takes off running as fast as she can, but the rest of the foxes aren't letting up and keep chasing after her. She eventually tumbles into the snow, feeling completely helpless and knowing she's just too weak to fight back. Kinu leaves a trail of blood in the snow, thinking about how she can't handle a fight all by herself. All she really wanted was to stay with her pack, but as she runs, she wonders if looking the same as everyone else is actually that important. She feels like she's totally alone in the world now, just wishing she had some friends or a family to go back to. Suddenly, she runs right into a group of wolf-type monsters. They start growling and circling her, and it's clear they aren't friendly. Kinu looks at them and thinks they're lucky since they all look exactly the same, which is exactly why they still have each other. As the pack closes the distance, she starts wondering if this is actually the end of the line and if she's about to get eaten. She tries to tell herself it can't be helped because she's weak and has nobody to back her up. She's just so tired of running and everything else, but then the wolves jump her all at once. They start biting and tearing into her, making her scream out in total pain. She realizes she's in a bad spot, but something inside her snaps and she starts shouting that she doesn't want to die. She refuses to go out like this in some random place, and she's not about to just let them kill her without a fight. Kinu glares back at the pack with everything she's got left, deciding right then that she's going to keep fighting until the very end. Kinu looks up, totally caught off guard, when a casual voice suddenly calls out to her. It's a guy in a hood standing right there, looking back and asking if she needs some help. By the time she even realizes what happened, the entire pack of wolves that was just attacking her is dead on the ground. On looks her over and mentions she's pretty rare with those two tails, then remembers he's got a potion in his bag to help her out. Kinu stares at him, thinking about how he's clearly super strong, but for some reason he doesn't feel scary at all. He starts pouring the liquid on her wounds, making her flinch from the cold, while he casually notes that she looks like she's all on her own. Then, out of nowhere, he looks her right in the eyes and asks if she wants to be his companion. On reaches out a hand and tells her to just come with him, and Kinu can't believe it. She repeats the word companion to herself, wondering if he's actually offering to be her family. She decides right then that she wants this more than anything. As the bond forms, she can actually feel the connection between them, and it's a warm, comforting feeling she's never had before. She realizes that even if they look different, they can still be a team. On asks if she has a name, and when she doesn't say anything, he decides to name her Kinu. Kinu repeats her new name to herself, thinking about what a great name it is while the two of them start spending all their time together, hunting through the wilds, and as they keep moving, Kinu starts to evolve more and more, changing from a simple fox into something way more powerful as she runs through dungeons at his side, getting stronger with every fight. On always makes sure to talk to her and treat her like a real partner, but despite all that, Kinu starts feeling like she's not pulling her weight. She thinks back to how she just got wrecked in one hit, leaving On to worry about her. Seeing him actually tear up over her safety makes her realize she's tired of being a burden and wants to actually help him out, so she focuses every bit of her will on one specific wish. She wants to stand beside him, not just as a pet, but in a body just like his. On's eyes go wide when he sees a girl with long hair and fox ears sitting right where his companion was. He asks if it's really her, and Kinu looks at her new hands, realizing that even if she looks totally different now, she doesn't have to worry about being an outcast anymore. Kinu thinks back on everything, feeling like today was the absolute happiest day of her life, because On showed her that their different races don't matter when it comes to being partners. She wonders if she'll have more days like this, and hopes that maybe one day she can be his number one, but then she realizes it's totally fine even if she isn't. To her, On is already the most important person in the world, and she knows that feeling isn't ever going to change. She figures a guy like him will probably end up being a hero to a lot of people, and she just wants to be there to share his dream, so she vows to keep getting stronger right alongside him. A little while later, morning rolls around and On's eyes snap open. He stays lying in bed for a minute, looking over at Kinu who's still resting, so he reaches out and starts gently petting her fox ears, wondering if she's still sound asleep when she finally stirs. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she looks up and tells him good morning. On feels a bit bad and asks if he's the one who woke her up, but she just smiles and says she's been up for a bit. Kinu gives a soft smile and says she finally realized everything wasn't just a dream, and that she's finally starting to feel like this is her new reality. On smiles back and tells her he's really glad to hear that, but he mentions he has some things to discuss with Eris and Urus, so he asks Kinu to come along with him, and once they find them, Urus greets them both with a good morning and asks if they slept okay, while Eris just wants to know what they need to talk about. On takes a seat and starts explaining everything that's happened to him so far, before moving on to lay out all his plans for the future. Eris is completely blown away to find out On was actually a human adventurer once, and Urus adds how it all led to On meeting Kinu and eventually bringing him into the mix too. On looks at them and says meeting the three of them made him realize that he isn't alone anymore, and reminds Kinu of his promise that they'd be partners and aim to be the strongest, but he makes sure Eris and Urus know they're just as important to the team. Then he looks at them with a serious face and tells them his big dream is to officially start a clan with all of them together. He explains that the Adventurer Guild actually has a system for this, allowing groups to form their own official community to take on the world. On gives a big laugh and tells everyone he wants to be with teammates he can actually trust. because his goal is to build the strongest clan that feels just like a family. Urus thinks that's a killer idea and says it sounds like a lot of fun, while Kinu blushes and smiles, telling him that whatever he dreams of is her dream too. Eris gets all hyped up and asks what the plan is and what they need to do next, so On explains that the first step is turning the Prenzvelt dungeon into their official clan house to use as a safe home base. He holds up a finger and asks if they can change the dungeon's shape so outsiders can't just walk in, and Urus admits it's not impossible, but there's a catch. Eris puts on a little suit and starts lecturing, explaining that dungeons exist all over the world for a specific reason. They handle the planet's mana circulation. He goes into full teacher mode, showing how the planet and every living thing cycles mana to keep life going, and dungeons are just there to make that process more efficient. On looks a little annoyed and asks why he's even bringing all this up right now, especially since Eris drops the real truth and says that if they don't keep the mana flowing, they won't be able to earn any of those important dungeon points they need. Urus and Eris explain that if they just block off the entrance, the dungeon won't be able to pull in mana from outside. Without that energy flow, the whole place basically stops working, which leaves On thinking hard about how to handle the situation while Urus confirms that's the main hurdle they've got to clear. Kinu watches them closely, waiting to see what the boss comes up with until On points out that they should just focus on farming dungeon points here as efficiently as possible. He suggests using those points to expand the facilities and linking everything together with the sync feature. And Urus looks completely stunned by the idea, admitting that the plan actually makes a ton of sense. The little guide can't believe he didn't think of it first, while Kinu gets a huge smile on her face, telling On she knew he'd figure out a way to make it work. She's clearly impressed by his quick thinking, but Eris is still tripping out, saying he's never heard of a dungeon master trying something so crazy before. The whole concept is totally new to him, so Urus asks if he already has a specific vision for how the place should look, and On doesn't hesitate to tell them he's got it all ready to go. He stands there with total confidence before shouting out the big plan. They're going to use the dungeon's powers to build an entire town from scratch. He's all fired up about the idea of turning the place into a real home, explaining that the first floor should be changed into an open grassy plain where they can spend points to put up actual buildings. He thinks starting small with just a basic inn and a shop is the best move for now, and to keep the rest of the dungeon accessible, they'll just hide a magic circle somewhere in the town that warps people straight to the second floor. On explains that the town will serve as a buffer, making it so adventurers just think the dungeon starts further in. He points out it's better to let them have that misconception while explaining how a town right next to a dungeon is the perfect way to gather people. If they can pull mana from the town itself, the dungeon gets stronger, and that just attracts even more people. It's a cycle that Eris thinks is absolutely genius. He realizes that if things go according to plan, they'll be swimming in dungeon points. And Kinu just stands there looking completely floored by the whole idea while the little wolf guide keeps hyping it up. He mentions that if they mess with the core room entrance and use a different avatar, they won't even have to worry about anyone finding or breaking the core, leaving On to bring things back to reality. He holds up 2 fingers and admits they still have 2 major hurdles. First, humans need a reason to actually build there. And second, the fact that he and his crew are technically monsters is a huge problem. He knows that if they can get into town, they can control the flow of information, but they'll never be able to start a proper clan unless they can somehow register as adventurers again, making Eris bring up the fact that On used to be an adventurer before all this happened. On points out that his human self is probably officially dead by now, and since his appearance has totally changed, he'd have to re-register from scratch, but the biggest issue is the horns on his head. He touches them with a worried look, knowing there is no way anyone is going to mistake him for a regular human looking like that until a sudden realization hits him. His eyes go wide, and he tells the others that he just remembered something important, and he explains a story his grandpa once told him about a race called the Kijin from the land of Wa. He thinks they might be able to use that bit of history to their advantage. On figures, he can just tell everyone he's a warrior from the land of Wa who's out traveling to get stronger. He thinks that's a perfect cover story since Eris has actually heard of the Kijin race before. The little pig looks a bit nervous about the whole thing as the guide explains that Kijin are known for having insane strength, but since they're so rare and almost never show up in public, On thinks they can make the lie work. If they can stick to that story, he's pretty sure Kinu will be fine too. When she asks what her role is, On points out that everyone will just see her as a beastman who can take human form, so the plan is to head over to the city of Lekria and try to register as adventurers again. Kinu is totally on board with the idea, and On gives Eris and Urus their orders before they leave. He tells them to stay behind and keep farming dungeon points just like they've been doing, but he makes sure to tell them to use telepathy to call him if anything goes wrong. The two little dungeon guides promise to handle things while On and Kinu get ready to move. He decides they'll head back to Prenzvelt first before making the final trek toward the city, and then he triggers the teleportation between dungeons. There's a quick flash of light that leaves the guides behind, and suddenly the two of them are standing out in a wide open field with the mountains in the distance, ready to start their next move. Standing on the rocks outside the dungeon, On notices that the entrance and the exit to Prenzvelt are actually really close together, and he tells Kinu he wants her to get used to fighting in her new human form. He thinks they should head for the city of Lekria and hunt some monsters on the way. Kinu just nods and says she gets it, looking ready to go, so she starts walking ahead through the field. She mentions that she'll probably be able to handle combat without any problems at all, when a couple of one-horned rabbits jump out from the grass to ambush them. Kinu spots them instantly and points her finger like a gun, and she lets off a massive blast from her fingertip that completely wrecks the area, leaving On standing there totally stunned by the power. He tells her she's seriously incredible, but Kinu just looks super proud of herself. On realizes her magic power has hit a whole new level since her evolution, but then he hears a noise and looks toward the woods. He sees a carriage moving through the trees and wonders what it's doing out here. And as it gets closer, we see Baru the merchant holding the reins, looking like he's in a massive hurry to get somewhere. Baru looks over in total shock when he hears someone calling out to him from the side of the road, and On waves him down, asking the merchant what's with all the crazy hurry. Kinu just stands there quietly while Baru slams on the brakes to stop the carriage. He recognizes On right away but gets confused, asking who the girl standing next to him is. On introduces her as Kinu and asks Baru if he remembers that fox monster they ran into a while back. He explains that she used a special skill to take on a human form, making Baru wonder if she basically turned into a beastman. The merchant is completely floored by her new look. He says he's never seen a beastman that cute before. But then Baru snaps back to reality and starts panicking again, begging On to help him out. On keeps it cool and asks what the actual problem is, noting that he was driving like his life depended on it. So Baru starts explaining that there's a dungeon located right near a place called Yahello village, and he looks absolutely terrified as he reveals that a massive monster stampede is about to go down. On realizes the reason all these high-level monsters have been showing up lately is because they're escaping the dungeon, and Baru starts losing it, crying about how everyone back home and his whole family are going to die if they don't do something. The merchant is so desperate he promises to give On every single coin he has if he'll just help them, while On tries to get the guy to chill out, telling him he'll handle it, and that he just needs to lead the way to Yahello village. Baru wipes his eyes and agrees, finally starting to pull himself together. The group moves out fast. Baru keeps thanking them from the driver's seat as On and Kinu keep pace with the carriage. On asks for more details on this stampede, confirming it's a massive overflow of monsters before asking how bad things are right now. Baru explains that when he first took off to go find some help, the fighters in the village were just barely holding the monsters back, but he knows they won't be able to last much longer, leaving the village chief with the impossible task of evacuating everyone, even though the poor people have absolutely nowhere else to go. Baru mentions that some villagers are refusing to leave their homes, which is making the whole evacuation a total mess, and On looks at the situation and admits things are looking pretty bad, wondering what their next move should even be. Kinu speaks up and asks On if it's possible to just evacuate everyone to Prenzvelt instead, and the idea hits him. He realizes if they go there, he can personally manage the dungeon settings to keep everyone safe. He figures as long as there are beastmen who can fight, they can handle any small-time monsters nearby, so he gives Kinu props for the great idea. Baru is completely lost, asking where this Prenzvelt place is since he's lived around here his whole life and never heard of it. On tells the merchant he's going to trust him with a huge secret, but he needs Baru to swear he won't tell anyone else. Baru doesn't hesitate, swearing on his pride as a merchant and a beastman that he'll keep the secret of the man saving his people. On smiles, feeling relieved, and drops the bombshell that he's actually a dungeon master in charge of a hidden dungeon. As they keep moving toward the mountains, On explains the dungeon is called Prenzvelt and is located in the Azure Plains, promising it's the one place they can all stay safe. On realizes the biggest problem is protecting the village during the evacuation, so he tells the others he needs a second to think. Baru admits he's useless on his own and promises to follow whatever orders On gives, and On just nods, agreeing to take charge. On reaches out to Eris and Urus through their mental link. They both answer right away, wondering what's going on. He starts explaining that while he was headed toward Recria, he ran into a merchant he knows. He tells the cores that a nearby dungeon is about to blow up into a stampede, so he asks them for the lowdown on how those things work. Urus and Eris explain that a stampede is basically a massive system failure triggered when a dungeon runs out of mana. The core starts ignoring all the usual rules to force spawn tons of monsters, hoping the resulting battles will generate the mana it needs. On thinks it over and asks if killing every monster that comes out of the dungeon would be enough to stop the whole thing, but Eris warns that's only a temporary fix, and Urus adds that the monsters will never stop coming until the dungeon core itself is smashed. They explain the monsters come in waves, so if he can wipe out one group, it'll at least buy them a few days of peace before the next wave hits. On finishes thinking and gives himself a little nod. He's finally got the whole plan figured out. He links up with the cores and tells Urus to build 10 houses on the dungeon's first floor immediately, while Eris offers to help out, so On finishes by saying he'll call the shots on when to move everyone to the plains later on. Turning to Kinu, On explains his idea for getting the beastmen out of the village, but he makes sure to warn her that her role is going to be pretty risky. Kinu just gives him a confident nod, she trusts his judgment completely, and says she doesn't have any issues with the plan. Baru looks pretty guilty about the whole thing, apologizing for dragging them into this mess while also thanking them for stepping up. On doesn't want to hear it and tells him to save the thanks for after they're done, as he and Kinu start heading toward the village. He shouts out that the rescue mission for Yahello village is officially a go, and everyone looks locked in. The carriage rattles along the path until On finally spots something in the distance. He points out the village sitting right there in the valley, and they realize they've finally made it. On gets a serious look on his face, and reminds everyone to stick strictly to the strategy they just discussed. On looks at the red panda merchant and tells Baru he's counting on him to handle things. Baru nods back, promising he won't let him down. Turning to his familiar, On tells Kinu she's coming with him. She just gives a short nod, ready to move. The two of them take off running toward the smoke on the horizon, as On yells out that they're going to save Yahello village, leaving the scene of total chaos behind. Beastmen villagers are everywhere, screaming and fighting for their lives against the monster raid. A bear warrior is right in the thick of it when Kinu calls out her fire wall spell. A massive wave of flames erupts out of nowhere, stopping the monsters in their tracks while Kinu stands her ground, telling the stunned warriors that she and On will take over the fight here. On steps forward into the clearing and introduces himself, simply telling the group that his name is On. He doesn't waste any time, ordering the beastmen to get back to the village and help everyone evacuate, but the bear warrior just looks confused, asking who they even are. On tells them to get the full story from Baru later because they're busy, adding that it's way too hard to use big magic with allies standing in the way. The warrior finally realizes they're with the merchant, and On finishes by reminding him that keeping the villagers safe is the only thing that matters right now. The bear warrior looks at the situation and realizes On is right, agreeing that they need to focus on the villagers. He apologizes for the trouble but tells On and Kinu that he's leaving this front to them. So the beastmen take off to help with the evacuation. Kinu watches them go and says it's time to get started, while On grips his massive spiked club, saying it's finally his turn to go wild on these guys. He calls out to Kinu, telling her not to hold back even if he's in the way. He just wants her to wipe out any monsters that manage to slip past him, and Kinu tells him to leave it to her, smiling as she says there is absolutely no way she would ever accidentally hit him. On activates his Jinrai skill, and a surge of energy hits him. His strength and speed double for the next 5 minutes as he drops from the sky like a bolt of lightning right into the middle of the monster horde. An orc barely has time to raise its club before On is already there, tearing through the front line with one massive, crushing swing. He moves through the rest of them like a blur, hitting multiple targets at once, and leaving nothing but a pile of dead monsters in his wake. On notices the flow of the battle is changing. C-rank monsters are starting to show up among the D ranks, making him wonder if the guys coming next are gonna be even tougher. While they're in the thick of it, On checks in on Kinu to see if her MP is doing okay. She tells him she's still got about half her mana left, but On suddenly stops as he realizes something is happening with his own body, something isn't right, and he suddenly doubles over, clutching his face in pain while Kinu watches, completely caught off guard by what's happening. Kinu shouts to see if he's alright, but On can barely answer. He realizes he's actually starting to evolve right in the middle of the fight. He tries to keep it together while the lightning sparks around him, telling Kinu he knows what's going on, and Kinu just gives him a steady smile, telling him not to worry and to just leave the rest of the fight to her. On feels bad for leaving her to handle it, but he tells her he's counting on her as the energy starts to take over. Then a system message flashes. Since this is a special evolution, he doesn't get a choice in his new form, and the process kicks off right away. On stands there as a massive burst of dark energy erupts all around him, signaling his transformation into a Rakshasa. On opens his eyes as the transformation finishes, immediately calling out his status screen to see the changes. He checks out his new Rakshasa stats while the digital window flickers in front of his face, And once he's ready, he shouts Kinu's name to get her attention. He tells her he's about to go all out and really start wrecking things. He explains that he's gonna use a brand new skill, but he's worried the power might actually hit her too. So On tells her to back off as fast as possible and focus on her defense. He even says if it looks too dangerous to block, she should just warp out of the dungeon. Kinu nods and says she's got it. Then On says he's heading in as she runs for cover, and he starts charging straight toward the enemy lines with his massive club. A whole crowd of monsters is waiting for him. Orcs and lizard men are everywhere, just waiting for the clash to start. But On notices things are getting even more serious. B-rank monsters are starting to show up in the back of the group now. He grips his weapon tight, thinking the first wave is finally hitting its peak. He tells himself not to worry, and with a scary look on his face, he smirks at the monsters. He tells them he's gonna blow them away before they even realize they're in pain. On stands right in the middle of the field as the monsters close in from all sides. Orcs and lizard men are everywhere, but he doesn't even look worried since he triggers his new skill, calling out lightning drum and thunderclap as crazy electricity starts sparking all around him. The power boost is huge, doubling his lightning damage and amping up his strength while he swings his club in a massive circle, creating a shockwave that sends the entire front line of monsters flying back like they're nothing. On catches his breath for a second and looks over the crowd. He tells himself it's time to head straight for the center of the pack, so he starts focusing his energy into his palms, calling out lightning jade as small orbs of electricity begin to form between his fingers. He slams the energy down and lets it rip, blasting lightning through every monster nearby and clearing a path for his next move. Right after that, he uses Sky Dance to launch himself way up into the air, hovering high above the silhouettes of the monster army. Looking down from the clouds, the massive orcs look like tiny dots on the ground. He looks at the center of the horde and says that this is it, and On pulls his fist back as it starts glowing with intense energy. He yells out that he's putting everything he's got into this one hit, and he dives straight down like a meteor, screaming the name of his ultimate move, Nirvana King, as he prepares to flatten everything in sight. A massive pillar of black lightning slams into the ground with enough force to shake the whole area. Baru Baru and the village chief just stand there staring at the smoking crater left behind. It's a total mess, and as the energy fades, a status screen shows that On's ultimate move burned through almost all his mana. He takes a second to steady himself and tells the others it's time to talk strategy. On explains that once a stampede like this starts, it's not going to stop until they track down and smash the core. He tells them straight up that the village is a lost cause, the buildings and fields are done for, and they need to convince the people to move. He asks Baru Baru if he can handle the villagers, and the little guy promises he'll get it done. On figures they have a few days of breathing room if they wipe out this first wave of monsters. He wants everyone evacuated toward Prenzveld as fast as possible, but the problem is there are only about 10 houses at the new spot. He knows it's a tight fit, but tells them they'll have to find a way to make it work. Baru Baru nods and says he's got it, gripping the reins of his carriage as he gets ready to head out. With the evacuation plan set, On turns his focus back to the battlefield and says it's time to talk about how they're going to wreck the rest of the monsters. He looks at the group and makes it clear that the fighting is just going to be him and Kinu. She just gives a quiet nod, totally ready to jump into the chaos with him. On looks out at the distance and says he isn't about to just let the warriors currently fighting die. He tells the group that if it looks like they can't win, he'll think about retreating, but he makes it clear that if they do have to pull back, the evacuation timing is going to happen way faster. He tells them they need to get the villagers on board immediately so they're ready. He looks right at the merchant and tells Baru Baru he's counting on him. The little guy looks back with a serious face and says he understands exactly what needs to be done. On stands alone in the middle of the scorched earth he just created, vowing to see this through to the end. He looks at the empty wasteland and thinks he might have actually overdone it with the cleanup. He turns to check on Kinu, asking if she's doing alright after that massive blast. She gives a small nod, and he figures she's fine since she stayed well outside the range of his power. But Kinu just stares at him with total respect, telling him that what he did back there was absolutely amazing. Moving on stands among the rubble and says they should probably head back toward Yahello village for now. Kinu gets a message saying the others are waiting near the village, and she quickly replies that she's got it. On starts walking off and calls back that he'll be arriving there soon, waving to her as he heads toward the meeting spot. Later, as On and Kinu reach the entrance of the village, they're spotted immediately. Baru Baru comes running down the path as fast as he can, yelling out to On. Baru Baru comes running up and asks the village chief if he's doing okay, while the old man just looks at the destruction and says things have turned into a total mess. On steps in and lets them know that everyone is safe and the monsters are completely wiped out. Baru Baru looks at him and realizes that the insane black lightning from earlier was definitely On's magic, but he quickly shifts focus and asks how things are going back at the village. The chief replies that they've finally managed to get every single person to agree on the evacuation. On tells them they need to pack up and head out right this second. He warns them that they've only got a few days of breathing room left before things get bad again. He stops for a second like he's got one more thing on his mind. The village chief looks over at him with a lot of respect and asks who exactly he is. The old man introduces himself as Mermal, the chief of the village, and bows low while thanking On for saving the entire beastman race from the attack. On gets all awkward and tells the chief he should be thanking Baru instead, since he only jumped in to help his friend. Kinu just teases him for being shy while he tries to change the subject to what they're doing next. He has Urus open up the first floor of the Prenzvelt dungeon right there on the plains, making sure everything is ready to house the refugees. With Baru and Mermal leading the way, the entire group of beastmen starts the long walk toward their new home in the dungeon. It turns out that even the beastmen who were stubborn about staying in the village changed their minds instantly. After seeing that massive display of lightning magic, nobody was arguing about the evacuation anymore. On realizes he probably went a little too hard with the magic and looks pretty awkward about it. He tries to shake off the feeling and calls out to get someone's attention. He asks Baru if he can spare a minute to talk. The little guy is pretty surprised by the sudden serious tone, but On doesn't beat around the bush and tells Baru he wants him to officially join their group as a companion. Baru is completely stunned and can barely make a sound. On keeps going, explaining that he's going to need a lot of help with the big plans he has for the future, leaving Baru just staring at him in shock, asking if he really wants a guy like him to be a teammate. Baru gets worried and points out that he's not a fighter, but On just smiles. He tells him that's not the point because there are things only Baru can do. He explains that he's planning on starting a clan, but he's never actually managed people or run a business before. Since Baru is a traveling merchant, On knows he's the perfect person to handle the money and find the funding they're going to need. Baru listens to the plan and finally starts to feel a bit more confident. He tells On that if that's the kind of help he needs, he's definitely down to join and be useful. Baru doesn't hesitate for a second and says he definitely wants to join the group as a companion. On looks relieved and tells him he's glad to hear that, reaching out as Baru stands there a bit overwhelmed by it all. But before they make it official, On asks if they can set up a subordinate contract right now. He explains that even though it sounds intense, it's mostly just to unlock more abilities and isn't meant to actually tie Baru down or anything. Baru is a little shocked by the idea at first, but he reaches his hand out anyway. He says if that's what's required to be part of the team, then he's totally on board. On takes the little guy's hand and finishes the process, telling him the contract is officially done. He makes sure to thank Baru for trusting him, and with that, their new partnership is set. Moving on, the situation at the village is finally starting to settle down. Since On and Kinu stepped in to help out, all the beastmen villagers managed to finish their evacuation. They've moved everything into the Prenzvelt dungeon, where they'll finally be safe from the chaos outside. Village Chief Mermal stands there nodding to himself, feeling pretty good about how things turned out. He mentions that this successful escape is also thanks to Baru's hard work. He goes on to say that he'd actually love for Baru to step up and be the official representative for the village beastmen. But as he's talking, someone nearby notices something is missing. They look over at the empty carriage and realize the merchant is nowhere to be found, leaving everyone wondering where Baru actually disappeared to. Baru stands in the center of a massive, tree-filled chamber and says he's totally shocked that a place like this even exists inside a dungeon. Urus steps up to explain that they're currently in the core room of the Prenzvelt dungeon. He tells Baru that he and Eris are the dungeon cores, and they're the ones who handle all the management around here. Baru picks up the little plushy-looking cores and says he's heard all about them from On. He introduces himself as the traveling merchant from Yahello village and tells them it's great to meet them. On gathers everyone into a circle and says it's time to get started. He tells the group he's going to lay out the plan for what they need to do next, starting with the fact that they should leave solving the monster stampede to the regular adventurers. He holds up 2 fingers and explains that there are 2 big reasons why they're staying out of it. The first is to give the humans a simple explanation for why the beastmen abandoned Yahello to build a new village. Plus, since they aren't human themselves, the second reason is to make sure they don't stand out too much. On goes on to say that if they're the ones who end up fixing the stampede, the humans might get the wrong idea about them, and that's something he wants to avoid at all costs. So for the first part of the plan, On tells Baru to head to the city of Reclia. He wants him to go straight to the Adventurers Guild and warn them that a stampede is about to go down. On tells him to make sure the guild knows the beastmen have already evacuated their village. He also wants Baru to pass along the prediction that the monsters are going to head right for the commercial city of Meralda, which is basically the biggest trading hub in the whole country, making it a massive target. On explains that the guild and the top brass will move way faster once they realize the whole country is at risk. Baru looks up at him and asks what On's plan is for himself during all this. On says he and Kinu are going to step in and hold back the stampede just enough to show the adventurers they're actually allies. Then they'll head back to Fornoir when the timing is right. Baru nods and says he's got it, promising to head out for Reclia immediately. And as he turns to leave, he tells On and Kinu to make sure they stay safe out there. On yells for him to send a telepathic message if anything goes wrong, watching as Baru bows and vanishes. 2 days pass, and the scene shifts to the wide green plains located right between Yahello village and the city of Meralda. On and Kinu stand together in the distance, noting that the adventurers from Reclia and Meralda are already on the move and should be arriving any minute. It turns out Baru pulled off the plan perfectly, getting the report to the guild and triggering the formation of a massive subjugation force. The word even reached Meralda, and now the country has put out an emergency quest to bring in every adventurer they can find. The massive force sent to handle the stampede is no joke, totaling over 100 people, including the S-rank party Silver Sand Moon leading the charge. On tells Kinu the plan is to use this chaos to get the humans to finally trust them, while also focusing on her growth, since all the monster hunting lately has her level jumping up like crazy. He notes she's right on the edge of an evolution, so they'll head back to Fornoir as soon as it kicks in. Kinu just nods and says she gets it. On figures they should try to stay under the radar for now, just holding down the front line without showing off too much. Kinu looks over and asks if they're ready to start, just as a huge wave of monsters comes screaming across the plains. On gives her the green light and tells her it's time to move, his eyes locking on the target as they tear into the monster pack, with Kinu firing off energy blasts and On smashing through everything in his path. They dive into the fight way before the actual guild forces even arrive, making short work of the front line, and doing that immediately grabs the attention of the S-rank leader, who looks on in total shock at the power being shown. Explosions rip through the distance. It's clear as day that whoever is out there is fighting on their side, and Kinu looks over as more people show up, asking if they're actually adventurers or just caught in the middle. The guy in the lead introduces himself as Scold from the S-rank party Silver Sand Moon. He's running full speed while shouting that he's jumping into the fray to back them up. Kinu plays it off perfectly. She tells him they're lucky he showed up because they got jumped by monsters while traveling, just as he pulls his sword. She tells him to take the other side while she handles her own. Scold just gives a quick nod, and a lizardman charges right at him with a spear. He doesn't even break a sweat, dropping the monster instantly and moving on to the next one like a pro. The sheer speed of the clearing is wild. Scold actually stops to whistle, clearly impressed by how fast the field is getting emptied out. Back with the main force, the riders watch the smoke and wonder if those are the famous adventurers from Lecria everyone's been talking about. Seeing the path cleared, the lead soldier yells for everyone to move out, and the entire army lets out a massive war cry as they charge onto the battlefield. Scold leads the way by ripping through an orc, while the other soldiers jump into the mess. Everything is happening so fast as he slides past one monster and slams into the next one without stopping. Suddenly, a huge orc swings a club right at his head, catching him off guard. But Kinu jumps in and fires a massive energy beam that completely vaporizes the threat. As the smoke clears and Kinu walks off, Scold just stands there thinking about how crazy strong she is. Away from the fight, On looks at his hand and realizes his evolution is finally starting to happen, so he tells Kinu he needs to get back to the dungeon. She says she's coming with him, and just like that, On finds himself back in the quiet garden area to finish the change. On freezes as a blinding light wraps around Kinu, and he yells her name while he sprints across the bridge to get a better look at what's happening. The fox has grown massive, nearly blocking the entire path, and On just stands there thinking about how much bigger she got. It's actually kind of cute how fluffy she is now, so he asks Kinu if she's feeling okay while her giant eye slowly opens up. Kinu lets out a loud cry that echoes through the area, leaving On looking totally stunned, but she shifts back into her girl form and looks exactly like she used to. So On decides it's time to check her status. He stares at the screen with his jaw practically on the floor because her magic stats have shot up, and she can even heal now, making her the perfect support for the team. Kinu puffs out her chest looking all proud, saying the party is finally going to be stable because she's so reliable. On starts heading off, telling the group to let the regular adventurers handle the stampede while they go take care of their own business. Since then, On and the group stay put while keeping in constant contact with Baru to see how things are playing out. It gives them time to focus on fixing up and expanding the Prenzvelt dungeon from the second floor down, making sure everything is ready while the wait continues. Until Baru finally reaches out with a report about 3 days later. Word comes in that the Silver Sand Moon party successfully destroyed the dungeon core, and just like that, the monster stampede has finally stopped for good. Baru shows up back at the dungeon in a puff of smoke, letting everyone know that he's officially back from his trip. The group gathers in the core room where On tells Baru good job and asks how the town of Lekria is doing after the chaos. And the little merchant explains that as expected, the subjugation force led by Silver Sand Moon managed to put an end to the stampede. He mentions that the only people who actually know the details about the core are the party that killed the boss and the higher-ups in the government, so all the adventurers who helped out are getting paid by the state based on how much work they put in during the fight. But since Baru was the first one to give them info, he's getting a special reward. He asked for a massive magic bag, but that's not all. Baru mentions that rumors about On and Kinu have already started spreading among the local adventurers. And apparently, everyone is talking about some crazy strong traveler who helped out with the hunt. On is pretty happy since everything is going exactly as he planned, and after thanking the little merchant for the update, he decides it's his turn to make a move. Thanks to the stampede's aftermath, Prenzvelt just got a massive boost in dungeon points. On uses that energy to expand the dungeon down to 8 floors, keeping the first 5 easy for beginners while making the bottom floors a real challenge for mid-rank pros. Baru is just glad things have finally settled down over the last few days, but On is already looking at the first floor village. The warriors there are hunting local monsters for food without any issues, so the place is stable enough for his next idea. He tells Baru he's already asked the beastman to start building a shop and an inn, but then he drops the real news. He wants Baru to be the owner in charge of the whole shop. The little guy is completely shocked, but On tells him to just use his old human savings for the startup costs since the place will be printing money soon. To top it off, On says both he and the village chief have one more favor. They want Baru to be the village's official representative. On explains that in about 2 weeks, he's planning to build an entrance to the dungeon's second floor right in the middle of the village, which makes Baru look a bit nervous. So On asks if he's cool with handling such a big job. Baru says it's a huge role, but he'll definitely give it his all. And then On turns to Eris, who's wondering what his job is. He tells the little pig to shut down the old Fornoir entrance and turn that whole area into a base for their new clan, while Eris is told to watch the dungeon points and keep expanding Prenzvelt. Eris nods along like he's ready for the work, but On's already looking ahead. He tells the group that he and Kinu are leaving for Lekria right now to finally get registered as official adventurers, because the main goal is to hit B rank as fast as possible. Once they get there, they can officially start their own clan, so Kinu nods, showing she's totally on board with the plan and ready to move. On checks one last time to make sure everyone knows their roles before heading out. He tells them he's counting on them, and they all yell back that he can leave everything to them as the village starts buzzing with activity. Baru gets to work on the blueprints, while the dungeon cores start remodeling the rooms and setting up treasure chests, leaving On and Kinu to walk off across the open plains. They head toward the mountains, officially starting their journey to the city. On and Kinu finally make it to the city of Lekria, a place filled with stone roads and busy streets. As they walk through the center of town, On notices that everyone is staring at them. He realizes they're really standing out, but figures there isn't much they can do about it given what they're wearing, while all the people on the sidewalk start whispering. Some guys think their gear looks incredibly rare and cool, while others wonder if On is some kind of beastman. And Kinu gets plenty of attention too, with girls calling her cute. On keeps his eyes forward until he finally spots a large stone building with a compass emblem. He's reached his destination, the Lekria Adventurers Guild, and as he pushes open the heavy front doors and steps inside, he mentions that it's been a long time since he last set foot in a place like this. The adventurers sitting at the tables nearby immediately stop what they're doing. They look up in total shock, barely able to believe who just walked through the door, so On starts feeling a bit of pressure. He really wants to just get his business done and avoid any unnecessary trouble or drama, but the mood in the room shifts instantly. A guy jumps up and yells that On is the one who saved them all during the monster stampede, and the whole guild hall breaks out into massive cheers. On tries to stay calm and explains he's just there to register as an official adventurer. The crowd doesn't mind at all. They start shouting for someone to help him out and begin leading him toward the back, leading to a guild staff member waiting by a private door. She bows politely and tells On that the guild master is already expecting him, gesturing for him to come inside. On and Kinu walk into the office where the man in charge asks if they're the famous travelers everyone's talking about, and On just gives him a simple nod. The guy sitting behind the desk is a scarred veteran who introduces himself as Spolds, the guild master of this town, and he seems pretty laid back as he welcomes them in. On and Kinu stand there taking it all in as the guild master leans in close with a grin, making sure they know exactly who he is and that he's the one running things around here. He keeps the mood friendly and invites them to make themselves comfortable. while On introduces himself and Kinu, keeping things polite as they get the conversation started. On explains that his main goal is to register as an official adventurer, but he admits that the massive crowd outside really threw him for a loop. Spalds just laughs it off and says he used to be an adventurer too, so he gets it. Then he brings up the rumors about On going wild during the monster stampede. Apparently, every adventurer that On saved has been talking non-stop about how he's on a completely different level when it comes to power. And because of all that hype, the guild master asks On if he wouldn't mind giving him a quick demonstration of what he can actually do. Spalds explains that while new guys usually start at F rank, he's willing to let On skip ahead if he can prove how strong he is, and On gets hyped up, saying he's down for the challenge. So the guild master stands up from his desk and tells him to follow. Spalds leads the way out of the office, telling them to come along as they head down the stone stairs. The sound of their boots hitting the floor while they finally reach the bottom, where Spalds welcomes them both to the guild's underground training area. There's a group of B-rank guys waiting there that the guild master pulled from the lobby, and he tells On to go ahead and have a match with them. Meanwhile, the veterans are smirking, curious to see if this kid actually lives up to the hype. On tells him to hold on for a second, which makes Spalds wonder if the guy is actually starting to get cold feet. It turns out On is actually worried about Kinu, explaining that her magic is way too powerful and it might be dangerous for the other adventurers if she joins in. So the guild master points toward a practice post and suggests Kinu try shooting her magic at the target instead. He says he'll be able to tell exactly how much firepower she's packing just by watching her hit the mark. On tells Kinu he's got it, but she shouldn't use her intellect buff skill since he's planning to fight without any weapons. Kinu just nods along as Spalds comments on how confident the guy is and says he's looking forward to the show, while some dude in the back tells Kinu to give it her best shot. Kinu gets ready and points her finger, quietly calling out her Flame Lance spell, and a massive beam of fire slams into the target, blowing the whole thing apart. The guild master and the other adventurers stand there completely terrified by the blast. Smoke rises from the charred hole in the wall while Kinu looks pretty happy with herself. Everyone else is just staring in total shock. Spalds starts yelling about how that power is insane, especially since those targets were built to handle heavy magic. And then Kinu just smirks and mentions that as strong as that was, On is actually way more powerful than she is, a comment that totally freaks out the veterans nearby, as they can't believe anyone could actually be stronger than the girl who just vaporized a reinforced post. On starts cracking his knuckles with a wild look in his eyes, telling everyone it's finally his turn and asking which one of them wants to be his opponent. Glazer is introduced as a B-rank adventurer known as the Iron Wall, but the blonde guy with him shakes his head and says he's changing the plan since Spalds yells for the guys to bring out a physical testing target made of ore as tough as an ogre, and they set up the massive stone block for On to check out. He asks if it's actually okay if he breaks the thing, and someone just laughs and tells him to give it his best shot if he thinks he can, so On winds up his arm, making sure to mention he isn't even using any buff skills this time. He catches his breath and tells everyone he's ready to go. He throws a single, massive punch that connects with the ore, and completely obliterates the target, sending stone shards flying everywhere as the reinforced block is reduced to a pile of smoking rubble. Kinu looks totally impressed by the display, while Spalds and the other veterans just stand there looking pale and terrified. On looks back at the mess and asks if that's good enough for them. Spalds can barely find his words, just saying he definitely understands how strong they both are now and realizing there's no way he can spar with him, which leads to On asking the big question. He wants to know exactly what rank he's going to land after showing off like that. Spalds looks him right in the eye and tells him that he's been placed at C rank, but before On can say anything, Spalds explains that coming from F rank, a jump to C is the absolute highest the guild rules allow. He apologizes for the limit but says with their power, they'll definitely be rising to the top ranks in no time. Spalds lets them know he'll have their new C rank cards ready at the front desk when they leave, officially welcoming them both as part of the guild, but before they head out, he asks if they can step into his office for a minute. He stands by a map on the wall, telling them he wants to be totally blunt and look them in the eye while asking who they actually are. He's clearly seen enough to know they aren't just regular guys, so On just smiles, mentioning he knew that question was coming. He tells Spalds he's already got their story ready to go, and explains that he's part of the Kijin race while Kinu is a fox beastman. He keeps the explanation simple, just two people who lived in the woods together for as long as they can remember. He says his level is only so high because they had to hunt monsters every day just to stay alive, and once they both got strong enough to handle themselves, they finally decided to leave the forest and see the world, which leaves Spalds standing there in silence for a second. He repeats the name of the Kijin race to himself, looking like the pieces are finally fitting together. He starts to grin, saying that actually explains a lot, especially that insane physical strength he saw earlier during the test. Spulds reaches out and tells them they don't seem like the type to cause trouble, so he's not going to stress about it. Spulds reaches out to shake On's hand, telling them he looks forward to working together as members of the guild and moving on to the front desk. The receptionist hands over a tray while offering congratulations. On thanks her politely as they finally get their hands on those official C-rank adventure cards. Both of them can't help but show them off, and once they step outside, On shouts out how great it feels to be an adventurer again. Kinu just smiles, saying she's happy as long as she's with him. On looks over and suggests they should probably head out and buy a magic bag next. Kinu agrees, mentioning she's been meaning to restock on some potions anyway, so On says they should just take a long walk and explore the whole town together. Kinu hums a happy tune while they walk, and they spend the afternoon hitting up shops for new bags and restocking all their potions. On points down the street, telling Kinu they should go check out the accessory shop next, but the two of them suddenly stop when they hear someone calling out to them from behind. On stops in his tracks and asks what's going on, seeing a woman in a full maid outfit standing in the middle of the street. She's geared up with a massive axe and shield, looking like she's waiting for them, so On asks if she needs something. The woman looks completely overwhelmed, her face turning bright red as she starts to stammer. She can barely get a single syllable out while looking down at the ground, and suddenly she just loses it, screaming at the top of her lungs that she has something she absolutely has to tell him. She's sweating and looks totally desperate, which leaves On and Kinu standing there in total silence. She finishes her shout with a really weird formal phrase that makes On tilt his head in confusion. He repeats the weird word back to her and asks what her actual business is, but she just doubles down on the crazy, crying out that she's nothing more than a female pig for him. It's a total public meltdown, and before they can even process that, she drops straight to the pavement in a full bow. She's flat on her face, yelling for him to consume her right there in the street. On just stands there shaking, looking like he wants to disappear. He honestly can't believe what he's seeing. He stares at her in pure horror, wondering what is actually wrong with this girl and why this is happening to him. A crowd starts to gather around them to see what all the noise is about. On looks around frantically, wondering what he's supposed to do with everyone watching, while Kinu just asks what any of this even means. Kinu leans in and starts poking the woman's head while she's still face down on the ground. She calls out to her, trying to see if she's even still present, and tells her straight up that she's making On really uncomfortable. Kinu looks pretty worried about the whole situation, hoping the woman will just stop and explain herself. With the crowd staring, On tells the girl they need to find somewhere quiet so they can actually talk. She just stays on the ground making weird noises, so the three of them head through the city streets. The maid follows right behind them with her giant weapon, drawing even more eyes as they walk. On looks completely stressed out and whispers to Kinu, asking if this girl is even right in the head. He's looking for some kind of explanation for this behavior, but Kinu just looks back and says she doesn't think the woman is a bad person. She figures the girl just has way too much energy and feelings to keep inside. They finally find a cafe and sit down to try and have a normal conversation. On tells her once more that she needs to just relax so they can hear her out. On asks her what her business is, but the maid jumps out of her seat and starts stuttering again. She screams that she has been searching for him everywhere. She leans over the table and shouts that she's there for him to consume her. On just stares at her, realizing this girl is probably too far gone to reason with. On holds his head and says he's getting a massive headache from all the yelling. Kinu tries to calm things down, asking the girl to take it one step at a time and tell them who she is. The woman starts sweating and looks incredibly nervous as she finally opens up. She tells them that she used to be an orc guard before all of this happened. She looks down and explains that even after he called her a pig, he never actually tried to eat her. She calls herself a failure of an orc guard who doesn't know what she's doing. On's eyes go wide as he realizes he actually recognizes her from the Fornoir dungeon. She was that same orc guard he fought before, but she explains that she's actually an orc queen now. She used a special skill to take on this human form and introduces herself as Sink, making Kinu call on a total pig while he tries to apologize. He feels terrible because he honestly had no clue she was a girl when they first met. So On introduces himself properly and Kinu does the same, though she tells the girl she better watch out around him. On tells Sink to just take it easy. He promises they have all the time in the world to sit and listen to her whole story, and the three of them settle into their booth at the cafe while a waitress brings over their order. It's finally quiet enough to talk. On looks at his empty cup and nods, telling her it sounds like she's had a really rough time getting to this point. He still doesn't get one thing though, and asks why she's so obsessed with him eating her. Sink looks down and admits that back in her guard days, She was way too small and weak to be useful, feeling like someone as powerful as him shouldn't have to settle for such a low-quality meal. She didn't want to offer herself up until she was ready, so she screams that she's spent every day working to improve herself. She truly believes that after all that effort, she's finally good enough for him to consume. On looks pretty overwhelmed by the whole situation, but Kinu chimes in she thinks Sync just really wants to feel like she's actually needed by him, and Sync immediately drops her head to the table, shouting that she'd never be so bold as to ask for that. Honestly, just being a meal for him would be more than enough. On starts to get the picture, realizing just how deep this goes. Kinu gets all fired up and suggests they just make her a regular member of the team, especially since she worked so hard on her own for so long just to impress him. On admits that her dedication is definitely on another level, even if her common sense is a little broken. So Kinu promises she'll be the one to teach her how things actually work, and the table goes quiet for a second while they all sit there. Sync looks down, nervously asking if it's a no-go, but On finally gives in. He tells her that if she's really that determined to follow him, then he's not going to stop her, making Sync's face light up instantly. He asks if she's truly okay with joining them like this, and Kinu tells her she's looking forward to having another person around to help take care of On. The poor girl starts crying happy tears, wiping her eyes while she thanks both of them for the chance. She's so overwhelmed she can barely get her words out, but she manages a huge, teary smile. She tells them she knows she still has a lot to learn, but she's going to give it her all as part of the group. And looking back, it's a crazy jump from where she started, just a nameless orc guard with a wooden shield, never imagining she'd end up here. Sync explains how meeting On back then changed her entire world. Her only goal in life from that moment on was to eventually be eaten by him, and she actually felt jealous watching the other orcs get eaten and turned into his power. It sounds crazy, but she looks him right in the eye and calls him a pig guy, proudly claiming that she's just a female pig meant for him. She bows down as low as she can go, begging him to stay with her so she can be eaten whenever he's ready. Looking back to when she was just a regular orc guard, she remembers how much she wanted to see him again, and that's when everything started shifting. The other orcs noticed someone heading for the exit and they immediately labeled her a traitor, screaming for no one to let her escape. But the weirdest part was she could suddenly understand everything they were saying. The whole pack lost it and charged at her, yelling to kill her right where she stood, but she swings her shield and wrecks them, sending blood everywhere. Standing over the bodies, she realized that to be a worthy meal for him, she had to become the strongest and smartest version of herself possible. Sync decides right then that she can't show any mercy to those standing in her way, and the forest erupts with the sounds of a brutal one-sided fight. She stands over the pile of bodies, catching her breath after wrecking the whole pack, but then a blinding light suddenly flashes and covers the entire area as she starts to transform, officially evolving into a guardian orc. Checking herself out, she notices her bangs got longer and her whole look changed quite a bit. Moving through the trees, she spots a campfire and realizes there are actual humans nearby, so she sneaks closer to listen, and she's totally shocked to hear a guy talking about how he wants to eat up curvy girls. The guy keeps going, saying he's really into maids, and that's when Sync realizes that just being strong and smart wasn't going to be enough. She needed to become a curvy maid, convinced that this is the ultimate secret to finally making herself a delicious meal for On. Sync explains she spent the entire night studying exactly what men like, hiding in the bushes to take notes, and treating the adventurers like her own personal teacher. She starts moving through the thick forest, making her way forward with a brand new sense of purpose. By the next day, Sync decides it's time to leave the forest of eternal darkness behind. She's set on finding a way to get even stronger. While she's walking, some grass rustles nearby and a couple of one-horned rabbits jump out to pick a fight. But Sync just ignores them and keeps walking, even as some random adventurers show up. They start yelling about how they're going to take her down. The second they get a good look at her, they completely lose their cool and scream for everyone to run away as fast as they can. Sync looks down and sees they actually dropped a halberd in the grass. She figures it's just something the adventurers forgot in their rush. She decides to just borrow the weapon for herself, walking away while humming a little tune, clearly pretty happy with the new gear. A few days pass as she keeps traveling through the mountain, until she suddenly stops when she sees something strange up ahead. She looks closer and realizes she's found it, a glowing portal that's definitely the entrance to a dungeon. Sync decides it's time to step up and actually give the challenge a shot. She finally reaches the boss room, leaning heavily on her gear and huffing, saying she somehow pulled off a win. Even so, she knows she needs way more training because that fight was way too close, so she decides to start doing laps. She goes through a second run, then a third, and keeps pushing into a fourth, grinding through the same enemies until taking them down starts feeling easy, but then she notices her body is starting to feel that crazy heat again. Walking back, Sync realizes her appearance has gone through another big change, so she figures it's a good spot to finally take a break and teleports out, officially reaching her new evolved form as an orc queen. Later on, she finds a nice spot to sit under a tree and just enjoys how good the wind feels. She decides to check out her new status, but then her ear twitches like she heard something nearby. The dark-haired adventurer tells his buddy they're almost at Lekria, so they just need to keep moving a bit longer. But they don't see Sync watching them from the bushes, thinking she might get to overhear some useful info from them. But then she accidentally slams her hand down way too hard, making the two of them spin around like they've seen a ghost. Sync realizes she's totally busted, while the guys lose it and start screaming that the Crimson Orc Queen is right there. The two of them take off running as fast as they can, and from that day on, things really start to change. It seems like every time Sync shows up, adventurers start pointing and yelling that the Crimson has finally appeared. Everyone tells each other to run for their lives, and Sync realizes she's ended up with a bunch of scary nicknames because of it. Standing out in a field, Sync starts wondering about her new skill, so she decides she might as well test it out. She triggers her humanization skill and takes a deep breath, feeling the power start to move through her body as the transformation kicks in, shrinking her massive monster frame down. The transformation finally finishes and Sync lands softly on the grass, her old monster clothes left in a pile. She stands there looking at her hands and lets out a surprised sound as she starts checking out her brand new body. She's totally hyped because she looks completely human, with no monster ears or tail in sight. She clenches her fist, thinking this form is amazing and will make things way easier. Sync gets even more excited, thinking she finally has that legendary curvy look she's heard people talking about. She figures that since she looks like a person now, she can learn about humans without scaring them, so she decides to head toward town to figure out more about her new look. She starts booking it across the open field, hair flying behind her as she moves. Suddenly she spots two female adventurers standing nearby and thinks they're the perfect people to talk to. Sync calls out to get their attention, but the two women just look back at her with confused expressions. She tries to ask them a question while running up, but the two girls start screaming at the top of their lungs because Sync is still completely naked. Sync is confused why they're still scared, but the adventurers yell at her to get some clothes on and quickly hand her something to cover up with. Sync peeks over the edge of her new cloak, finally realizing why everyone was freaking out. She was definitely standing there completely naked and tries to explain that she just didn't have anything to wear. While the two adventurers check her out, they're glad the cloak fits and ask if she's doing better now. Sync starts spinning a wild story to the girls, telling them how she was just a helpless victim getting chased around by monsters and mean adventurers, making the two women feel absolutely terrible for her. They're picturing her getting bullied and can't believe anyone would be so cruel to her. They get all fired up and tell her not to worry anymore because they've got her back. They promise to protect her and personally escort her all the way to the city. As the blonde girl calls her over to start moving, Sync realizes she left her massive halberd and shield back inside the dungeon. She stands there for a second watching them walk off, eventually deciding she'll just have to go back and grab her gear some other time. They trek across the hills all day until they set up camp for the night. Sitting by the warm fire, Sync looks a bit nervous as she tells the two girls there's something she's been dying to ask them since they met. She leans in and asks if they know what that curvy slang word actually means, still trying to figure out if she's finally reached her goal. The two adventurers start laughing like crazy after hearing Sync's question, but Sync just stands there by the fire feeling completely left out and asks if she said something funny, while the girls try to figure out how to explain things without making it weird. One of them tells Sync that the word actually describes her perfectly, which catches her totally off guard. Sync looks down at her hands in silence, realizing that her body changed into exactly what she wanted without her even noticing it, and she just sits there soaking in the fact that she finally reached her goal, while the two girls watch her, thinking she's one of the strangest people they've ever met. The group finally makes it to the city of Lekria, and Sync can't stop looking around at all the buildings and people. Everything is brand new and looks amazing to her. The adventurers tell her that this is where they part ways, wishing her luck and telling her to take care of herself in the city. But as they start walking away, Sync feels a bit panicked and reaches out to grab one of their sleeves to stop them. With a super determined look on her face, she yells out that she wants to be an adventurer just like them. And the girls decide to help her out one last time by taking her right to the front doors of the Adventurers Guild. The guild receptionist smiles while handing over a new ID, telling Sync there was a lot to learn, but she's officially an F-rank adventurer starting today. And as soon as the registration is done, Sync grabs her halberd and shield to start grinding through quests every single day. It doesn't take long before the staff is congratulating her again, handing over a shiny new card and announcing her promotion to C rank. Walking through the city, Sync thinks to herself that getting this perfect body was actually pretty easy. This level of work is nothing to her. She realizes that her constant training with the transformation skill now lets her look like any race from elves to beastmen, but she still feels like something is missing, and that one thing is becoming a true maid. Out in the azure green plains, Sink stands around looking pretty confused, wondering if there are any maids just waiting to be found in the wild. But then a voice suddenly yells out from the side, telling her he'll teach her about maids as a gift before he finishes her off. This guy shows up swinging his sword and shouting that his name is Smash, the man who's going to save the entire world. He stops mid-swing and looks at her with a super serious, sweaty face, trying to get her to pay attention to his grand entrance. Sink asks the guy to explain exactly what he meant by those words, but Smash just panics, yelling that it was a total lapse in judgment while he runs away, begging her not to tell anyone what he said. As the dust settles on the street, someone asks if all she really wanted was to become a maid. Smash tells her that if that's the case, she should just go buy a maid outfit. He's sure someone with her vibes could find a great place to work, and Sink thanks him as he heads off. Sink goes straight to the local armor shop to make it happen. The shopkeeper looks pretty confused when she asks for a maid outfit, but she uses the money she earned from quests to get the whole thing custom made, and soon she's walking through the middle of town in the new gear. Everyone on the street stops to stare and whisper as she passes by, but she doesn't seem to mind the attention at all. Looking at her reflection, she smiles and thinks that now the look of a woman worth devouring is finally complete. She decides that all she has to do now is go find her master and pour out her feelings. She's determined to finally become his nourishment, no matter what. Before leaving, she heads to the library to put together a record of everything she's learned and experienced so far, and tucks the book onto one of the shelves, deciding to leave her knowledge behind for anyone who might need it. She hopes her notes can be a guide for other women who might be lost. And with that finished, she walks away feeling like she's finally done everything she needed to do. Sink catches a sweet scent in the air and stops in her tracks. Her eyes go wide as she realizes exactly who just showed up. On spots her from across the street and calls out as he walks by with Kinu. Sink is so shocked she can barely even move or say a word back, so she just thanks him for everything and bolts in the opposite direction, leaving her halberd behind as she runs. On and Kinu just stand there watching her go. On has no idea what's going on and asks what that was all about, but Sink doesn't look back. She's blushing like crazy and tells herself it's time to head to the final stage of her plan. Later on walks through the streets by himself with his hands behind his head. He thinks about how it's been a while since he was alone and remembers how Kinu and Sink headed back to the Forest Noir earlier. They told him they'd see him later, so he decides to go shopping for some gear. He finds an accessory shop where the display cases are packed with all kinds of sparkling rings and bracelets. As he looks through the glass, he thinks about how he'll be staying in town more often. He really needs a magic item to hide his monster status, but he quickly sees that even the cheapest items cost a fortune in gold. He leaves the shop feeling totally defeated and drained. On stands there thinking he could just use his dungeon points to grab a concealment item. He really wants to save those points for the dungeon renovation though, so he stops in front of an armor shop window and realizes these places usually have a few accessories tucked away somewhere. He figures it's worth a shot even if it's a long shot. He pulls the door open and steps inside the quiet shop to scan the counter, and right away he spots a basket full of random trinkets just sitting there. He doesn't want to waste time guessing, so he activates his appraisal eye skill to get a better look at the items in the basket, and he's shocked to find they actually have concealment rings and necklaces sitting right in the open. The shopkeeper tells him to come back soon as he walks out. On is feeling pretty lucky since he just scored all 3 items for only 1 gold coin. Moving on, he makes his way over to the local guild hall to find some work. Since he has to wait for Kinu and the others to get back before they can register as a party, he decides to look for a solo C-rank quest. Scanning the board, he finds exactly what he's looking for, a request to go out and investigate the Morphia Forest. On looks over the paper and notices it's a bit of an outlier since most C-rank jobs involve hunting, so he decides to head over to the counter to get the full story on what this investigation is all about. He hands the sheet to the receptionist and asks if they're really just looking for a report and nothing else. She tells him that's right, explaining that the Morphia Forest has been acting weird and the guild needs to know why. The forest is usually home to mid-tier stuff like red tigers and kobolds, but recently things have changed because B-rank monsters like griffins and big scorpions have been spotted moving in from the valley nearby, making On wonder if it's fine to just kill them if they get in his way, but the girl warns him that might be too dangerous for a C-rank. She takes a second look at him and suddenly realizes who she's talking to, asking if he's actually On. He says yeah, and she gets all hyped up saying the whole guild is talking about how powerful he is, and then she stamps the forms and lets him know he's officially signed up for the mission. The staff at the guild tells On to stay safe as he heads out, so he starts his trek through the open fields toward the mountain. After walking for a bit, he spots some dense woods in the distance and wonders if that's the place he's looking for. He finally reaches the edge of the morphia forest and steps inside, keeping his eyes open as he moves through the trees. Suddenly, he sees two female adventurers sprinting toward him like they're running for their lives from something behind them. On asks them if they're doing okay, but the lead girl looks completely shocked to find anyone else actually out here. He tries to figure out what happened, but the girls don't even stop to explain, they just scream at him to run away. One of them manages to yell out that a big scorpion is coming, just as the ground starts shaking with heavy thuds. The B-rank monster finally shows itself, and while the girls are losing it, On just thinks it's convenient the target showed up so soon. He tells the two of them to keep moving and get to safety while he reaches back and pulls out his massive weapon. He triggers his swift thunder skill and gets ready to swing, letting the lightning charge up as he jumps into the fight. The massive scorpion drops down from the trees to corner the group, but On doesn't hesitate. He dives straight for it while the two girls can only watch in total shock, completely frozen as they see him charge the B-rank beast alone. On lets out a loud shout and puts all his strength into a heavy swing, aiming to end this fight in one go. The spiked club smashes into the scorpion's head with a brutal thud. The impact is so hard it crushes the monster into the dirt, leaving the dust to settle. On stays on guard with a sharp look while the girls just stare, unable to process what they just saw. He rests his weapon on his shoulder and looks at the carcass, casually mentioning that the fight took a little longer than he thought it would. The girls start crying with relief, thanking him for saving their lives since they're amazed anyone could solo a B-rank monster, though On just wonders why they haven't run off yet. He tells them not to sweat it, but he points out that the monsters in this forest are definitely getting way more aggressive lately. The girls explain they were actually sent here to investigate the changes, noting that everything seemed fine back when they met up with Sync. On repeats the name Sync with a confused look, and the girls tell him she's a legendary beauty, leaving him even more curious about who this person is. On tells the girls they should head back to Lekria and report in to the guild while he sticks around to investigate. He wonders if they actually know Sync. Just as they're about to leave, the girl with the headband stops and asks what his name is, realizing they hadn't even introduced themselves. On gives her a small smile and simply tells her that his name is On. He waves them off, telling them to get home safe, and the girls shout back for him to take care of himself out there. Once they're gone, he starts hauling the massive scorpion parts together. It's time to get moving. On decides to push deeper into the forest, moving fast and dropping every monster that crosses his path with one heavy swing. He stands over his latest kill and counts them up: 3 griffins, 3 scorpions, and 3 grizzlies, realizing the whole ecosystem is completely broken. As he stuffs another giant limb into his bag, he thinks about how he's never seen anything this crazy in 10 years of adventuring. He cinches the bag shut and gets ready to head out, looking more serious about the situation. Far off in the distance, a dark shape flies over the mountains. It makes you wonder if something big is happening over at the Red Valley. On stands alone in the quiet forest, taking a second to think before deciding it's time to head back to town. Back at the guild, the receptionist greets him and asks for a full report on what he found out there. On explains that the rumors were right: monsters from the Red Valley have definitely moved into the forest, and the receptionist looks worried, saying they just got a similar report. But On casually mentions he already took care of every monster he ran into. He tells her he's got 9 B-rank kills and starts pulling a massive scorpion leg out of his bag, which makes the receptionist totally lose it, and she yells for him to stop, quickly leading him toward the dismantling area behind the building to handle the mess. They head inside the workshop and the receptionist calls out to the butcher, asking where they can unload all the monsters, while a little cat beastman named Kitakito shows up with a huge knife, telling them to just pile everything up on the table. On starts unloading the heavy carcasses, but the table fills up fast. He asks where the other 6 should go while the cat just stares in shock. The butcher tells him to just put the rest in the back room, so On nods and heads over to finish the job. The receptionist stares at the pile of Red Valley monsters, totally blown away that On managed to hunt this many in only half a day, and Kitakito points out how clean the materials are since On only hit them in the face. He offers a nice bonus for the quality, which On definitely appreciates. On asks if she has everything she needs, and the receptionist nods while finishing her notes. She says the situation is way worse than they thought, and she needs to tell the boss right away. She checks off the final boxes on the official forms, marking the dangerous forest quest as officially finished. The receptionist tells him he can pick up his reward money and the payment for the materials tomorrow, asking if that works for his schedule. On says that's fine with him and tells her he'll be back in the morning, waving as he heads for the exit. He walks out the door and makes his way back to where he's staying, the door clicking shut behind him. When he finally gets home, he lets out a tired sigh and calls out that he's back, noticing Kinu and Sink already hanging out at the table. Kinu hears his voice and looks back with a huge smile. She's clearly been waiting for him to get home. Both girls light up and yell out their welcomes. Kinu is happy he's back, while Sink makes sure to give him a proper formal greeting as his maid. On stands back and asks Kinu if she finished explaining everything to Sink. He's impressed with how quick the girl is and says he's got high hopes for their team. He lets Sink know she's officially heading out on missions with them starting tomorrow, and she gives a sharp salute, promising she's ready to go. While they're talking, On starts digging through his gear, telling the girls he actually has a little something he wants to give both of them. He pulls out a necklace and some rings, explaining that these aren't just for show, they're special items that can hide a person's status from others. The girls think the jewelry is beautiful, but On stays serious, telling them they absolutely have to wear these whenever they're walking around town. Kinu looks completely touched by the gesture, thanking him with a huge smile and promising she'll never take off the gift he gave her. Sink is even more emotional, tearing up as she thanks him. She says she's going to treasure the item for the rest of her life. On gets fired up and says they're going to crush a ton of quests tomorrow to hit B rank as fast as possible, but then he stops, realizing something's missing. He points out they need a party name since they're registering the group tomorrow, so he asks the girls if they have any cool ideas for what to call themselves. Kinu goes quiet and starts thinking really hard, trying to come up with a name that actually sounds good for their new squad. Kinu's ears perk up as she thinks back to the power she saw earlier, specifically On's magic. She remembers how incredible that black lightning strike looked, thinking about how it's basically like a violent storm, which gives her the perfect idea. She asks On if they should call the party Black Bolt and waits to see what he thinks. On loves the name immediately, and Sink is right there with him, saying it sounds absolutely perfect for them. It's officially a done deal. On tells the girls it's settled and he'll handle their party registration first thing tomorrow. The night is winding down, so On tells the girls he's hitting the sack and they should get some sleep too. Sink and Kinu wave him off, wishing him a good night. Once he's alone, On flops onto his bed, finally taking a second to just breathe after everything that's happened. But in the other room, the girls aren't sleeping yet. Sink and Kinu are giggling together, planning a special meal for On to eat tomorrow. On hears their happy voices through the wall and smiles to himself, just glad to see that they're actually getting along so well. Night turns to day as the sun rises over the mountain. On opens his eyes as the morning light hits the room. He sits up in bed feeling a bit out of it. He looks over and realizes Kinu is fast asleep right next to him under the covers. Turns out she stayed the night, and On thinks she's pretty cute for that. He quietly slips out of the room and shuts the door so he doesn't wake her, heading downstairs where Sink is already waiting. She's wearing her maid outfit and greets him with a huge smile, calling out to him as she brings over a massive breakfast. On gives a sleepy hello while looking at the spread of bacon, eggs, and soup. It looks amazing. He asks Sink if she's the one who cooked all of this, and she happily tells him she did. She explains that Eris actually built her a private room and a kitchen to use, which Eris seems pretty proud of. Sink bows and tells him she hopes the food is okay since she's still learning what he likes. On tells her it's a huge help and asks if she can just handle all their meals from now on. Sink looks like she's about to lose it from happiness, yelling out that it would be an absolute honor, while Kinu peeks in from the doorway to see what the noise is about. On notices Kinu is finally up and joining them for breakfast. He points out how amazing the food looks while Kinu rubs the sleep from her eyes, seeing the fresh spread Sink put together before getting a big morning hug. Baru walks into the room just as they're getting settled. On greets him and says since everyone is finally here, they should just sit down and dig in. So the whole group says their thanks and starts eating the massive feast together. A bit later, the crew heads over to the Adventurers Guild. They stand in front of the giant quest board looking for their next job. Kinu says they should just stick to the plan they talked about earlier, and On is totally down, saying they're going to power through as many quests as possible today. Sink is just as fired up. She says they need to keep this pace so they can hit B rank as fast as they can, and that's exactly what they do. The group goes on a rampage clearing missions so fast the guild staff can barely keep up with the paperwork while the guild master watches in total awe. As they're heading out, the guild receptionist calls after On, Kinu, and Sink to get their attention. The receptionist flashes a big smile and congratulates the group, sliding 3 sparkling B rank cards across the counter to let them know they've officially moved up in the world. On stares down at his new card with a serious look. This is a goal he's been chasing since he was just a little kid, and Kinu is just as moved, holding her card close while thinking about how lucky she is to have a crew she can trust like family. Sink looks at her card with a bit of a blush, knowing that building the ultimate clan has always been her biggest dream, but today is the day it all starts to feel real. The girls start jumping for joy and holding hands while the receptionist watches them celebrate their big promotion. On just smiles to himself, thinking about how this is only the first step toward his real goal. Today is definitely going to be a day he never forgets. He turns back to the counter and asks the receptionist to get the paperwork started for their new clan, while the girls keep cheering in the background. Later on, the group grabs a table to talk it over. On explains that the guild needs about 10 days to screen them before the clan is official. Sync is a bit restless, but she knows they just have to wait it out. On looks back on everything, thinking about how he'd completely given up on ever starting a clan back when he was still human. Kinu smiles, feeling like becoming monsters was the best thing that could have happened. They found the perfect teammates, and now they're all going to get stronger together. Sync is feeling motivated, telling the group she's going to work even harder to be useful. She's determined to make her big dreams a reality, and On can't help but smile, thinking about how becoming a monster was actually the best thing that ever happened to him. It was a huge turning point, but then the mood completely shifts when a man covered in blood and bruises stumbles through the door. On catches a glimpse of him out of the corner of his eye, and he sees a whole group of adventurers collapsed on the floor, looking like they barely made it back alive. On is shocked by how wrecked they are, so he jumps into action immediately, telling Kinu to use her healing magic while he grabs a potion to help out. Kinu gives a quick nod and rushes over to kneel beside one of the guys on the floor. She starts casting her healing spell, and a soft glow begins to cover his injuries. It's a lot of work, but the man just groans in pain, barely conscious as the magic starts to close up the worst of his wounds. On pours the potion over the guy's injuries to speed things up, and the adventurer mutters that he's finally safe. Kinu looks relieved to see him breathing easier, but On knows a simple potion is only good for first aid and won't fix everything. Just then Spolds comes running over to find out what the hell happened to these guys. The injured adventurer looks up with a terrified expression and delivers the bad news: a black dragon has shown up, and it's heading straight for the town of Lekria. Spolds looks over the damage and says that based on the size of the thing, it's gotta be an S-rank monster. On can barely believe what he's hearing, and Spolds asks exactly where the beast is right now, and the injured guy groans that it's currently in Morphia Forest. Spolds curses under his breath because the timing couldn't be worse, so On steps in to keep things moving, suggesting they get the guys who are really messed up to a clinic right away. Spolds snaps out of it, and a bunch of guild staff rush through the doors, shouting that they'll take over and carry the injured guys out. On and his group watch as the workers help the survivors up. One of the staff tells a guy to grab onto his shoulder so they can get him moving, leaving Spolds to turn back to On, telling him and the rest of his party to follow him up to his office. On just gives a short nod and says he's on it. Once they're in the room, Spolds starts the debrief. He mentions they probably noticed the forest's ecosystem started getting weird about 2 weeks ago, and he explains that's why he sent the A-rank party, Phantom Spring Breeze, to check things out. It turns out the guys they just helped were that exact team. The situation is a mess because there are 0 S-rank parties in the city right now. Spolds says even if they called for reinforcements from Meralda, the dragon would wreck the town before anyone showed up. He looks at On and admits he feels bad even asking for something this crazy, but he needs to know if they can somehow head out and slow the dragon down. Spolds bows his head, admitting that in terms of raw skill, On's party is the only hope they've got left. He's practically begging for help since On realizes how heavy this is and asks if this is officially a nominated quest. He needs to be sure what he's getting into, so Spolds quickly promises that the reward will be huge if they pull this off. He's not holding anything back because On gets a bit of a smirk on his face, thinking about how this is a hell of a way to start their first official job as a party. The reality of the situation hits. They're being specifically asked to take down an S-rank monster, which leads into On giving him the green light and saying he'll do it. Spolds looks like he can't even believe his luck and asks if he's actually serious. On tells him to just start talking and give them all the details on what they're up against, so they get to work. Spolds explains he already called for help from the Meralda Guild, but even if they move fast, backup is still a day away. He expects an S-rank team to eventually show up, but for now they have no clue why the dragon is even coming this way. The only thing that matters is getting everyone in the city to safety, and Spolds says he just needs them to stall the dragon and slow its progress. On keeps it casual and asks if it's fine if he just kills the thing instead. Spolds says of course, but he's clearly worried. Spolds looks pretty worried and tells On not to do anything too reckless since the whole thing is crazy dangerous. On just gives him a calm look and says he gets it, so he turns around to check in with the rest of his team. He asks Kinu and Sync if they're both actually okay with taking on a job this big, and Kinu doesn't hesitate for a second. She puts her fists up looking all fired up and says it's absolutely no problem for her. Sync is just as ready, looking totally happy as she says she'll follow Master On wherever he goes. With everyone on board, On decides it's time to move. Spulds looks down, feeling bad for putting this on them, and tells them he's really sorry but he's counting on them to pull through. On isn't having any of that gloomy energy though. He cracks a grin and gives Spulds a massive slap on the back that nearly knocks the wind out of him. He looks Spulds right in the eye and tells him he needs to show a lot more spirit when he's sending his best guys off to a fight. Spulds finally lets out a little laugh and admits that On is right. Someone calls out to him from across the room, and with a much better look on his face, Spulds reaches out and yells for them to go get the job done. He promises to handle everything back at the city, and On gives him one last shout of agreement as the party finally heads out to face the dragon. The team finally heads out, walking through the massive stone gates of the city and out into the open fields where On suddenly stops in his tracks. He looks up at the sky with a serious look and points out something moving toward them, and it turns out to be the dragon, already closing in way sooner than anyone expected. It screams as it flies over the trees, but On doesn't look scared at all. He just notes that the beast is moving at a much faster pace than he originally planned for. He tells Kinu and Sync to keep up as best as they can because he's going to jump ahead and knock the thing right out of the air. He doesn't waste a single second, activating his thunderclap skill as electricity starts sparking and popping all around his body. On takes off like a rocket, screaming as he flies through the air to meet the dragon head-on before it can reach the village. He swings his massive spiked club with everything he's got, smashing the dragon right in the neck and causing a huge shockwave. The dragon lets out a high-pitched roar as it gets rocked by the hit, and On just watches it start to stumble while he triggers his sky dance skill, keeping himself steady midair so he can stay on top of the beast and finish this quickly. Kinu watches On midair and asks if he's doing okay. He says he's fine. It's just a total pain dealing with enemies that can fly, so he starts giving out orders, telling Kinu to use her magic to specifically target the dragon's wings, while he tells Sync to use her taunt skill to draw the dragon's fire away from Kinu. Sync just smiles and tells him to leave it all to her. The two girls stand their ground as the massive beast circles above them. Sync gets her shield ready and says it's time to go as the dragon lets out a terrifying roar, showing off its rows of sharp teeth while looking for its next target. Sync steps forward, yelling that she'll be the one to take it on and telling the beast to bring everything it's got. Her eye narrows into a sharp slit as she triggers her taunt skill. A massive surge of energy pushes out to grab the monster's attention. It works instantly, and the dragon lets out a deafening scream before tucking its wings and diving straight for the ground where the beast crashes down hard. On doesn't miss a beat, jumping right onto its neck and making the monster freak out while Kinu focuses her power and fires off a massive blast of light. It connects clean, blowing a huge hole in the dragon's wing. The dragon slams into the dirt with a massive crash, sending clouds of dust and debris flying everywhere while Sync yells that she won't let it win. She digs her feet in and holds her shield steady against the monster's claw. The impact is too much though, and Sync gets tossed back through the air while Kinu screams out her name. On sees his chance and jumps in with a loud shout, landing a heavy blow that makes the dragon reel. Kinu rushes over to check on Sync, who's sitting in the grass feeling bad for letting her guard down. But she quickly casts a healing spell to fix up her scratches. A soft light starts glowing all around her. Kinu tells her she's all set, making Sync blush and thank her for being so nice during the middle of a fight. Meanwhile, On is still at it. He swings his sword and catches the dragon right in the jaw, making the beast stumble. Kinu notices a weird shadow on the ground just as Sync grabs her and yells that something dangerous is coming. The two of them dive out of the way just in time as a massive pillar of light slams into the spot they were standing. Sync grabs onto Kinu and cheers for On. She shouts that he's amazing and tells him to finish the beast off while he has the opening. But On stops her, looking closely at the monster while he points out that something about this dragon seems totally wrong. It's not acting like a normal predator. Sync notices it too, looking worried and mentioning how the creature actually seems like it's in a lot of pain, which makes On realize the dragon isn't even moving of its own free will. The beast just groans and struggles against itself as if something else is in control. A serious problem, because if it's being forced to fight, there's no way to predict what kind of crazy attack it's going to throw at them next. Sync looks up with sad eyes and asks if there's any way they can actually save it instead of just killing it. On takes a second to think, and decides they should keep the fight going just to figure out what's causing all this. He figures if they can find the source of the problem, they might actually have a chance to help it, so he starts giving out orders. He tells Kinu to focus all her attacks on the wings, while Sync needs to keep the dragon's attention with her taunts. On plans to get in close to check the dragon's condition himself. He apologizes for putting so much on them, but the girls are already on board and ready to go. And just like that, On triggers his lightning skills and moves in like a flash, leaving a massive trail of energy behind him as he starts the rescue mission. On flies through the air with his lightning drums active, closing the gap between him and the massive dragon. He's completely focused on the task at hand, and as he passes over the creature's spiky back, He notices something weird and triggers his appraisal skill to get a better look at what's going on, which reveals a dark, creepy sword with a literal eye on its hilt buried deep in the dragon's flesh. On recognizes it immediately as the magic sword Flam and can't believe his eyes, so he hovers there for a second, just staring at the cursed blade and repeating its name. The situation just got a whole lot more complicated than he expected, but he manages to land right on the dragon's back. The beast lets out a painful roar and starts thrashing, forcing On to leap away before he gets tossed off. And while he's midair, he shouts over to Kinu and Sync that he's figured out what's causing the dragon to act so crazy. The girls watch from the grass, waiting to hear the plan. Sync asks if he actually found something, and On tells them straight up that there's a magic sword stuck in the dragon's back that's likely the problem. And he explains that pulling that sword out is probably the only way to stop the dragon from going on a rampage. The only issue is he needs to keep the beast still long enough to grab it. So Sync looks at the struggling creature and suggests they might just have to knock it out cold. Even if she feels bad for it, it's a tough call, leaving On standing there thinking it over with a serious look on his face. He knows they have to act fast before things get even worse. On suddenly remembers that he's still carrying a massive stash of sleep mushrooms from a while back. A few might just make you drowsy, but a huge dose like this will knock anything out cold. And he quickly tells Sync and Kinu to keep the dragon's attention on them while he gets everything ready. The two girls don't hesitate for a second and agree to the plan. So while the dragon is busy roaring and dealing with the girls rushing its position, On starts rummaging through his gear to find the right supplies. Eventually finding a large empty sack and his pile of mushrooms, he pulls them out with a grin, knowing exactly what he needs to do to end this fight. And he starts stuffing as many of the moon-patterned mushrooms into the bag as possible. He's moving fast, trying to pack the whole thing full before his opening disappears. But once the sack is cinched tight, he looks back at the dragon and figures if he can just force-feed the beast the whole bag at once, it'll be lights out for sure. So he shouts over to the girls to stop their direct attacks and focus entirely on being a distraction. He needs the dragon looking at them so he can move in for the finish. And he explains that he's going to wait for the exact moment the creature opens its mouth to shove the entire load of mushrooms down its throat. Kinu and Sync both give him the nod, letting him know they're ready to back him up and follow his lead on this crazy play, leaving the three of them sprinting across the field to surround the dragon. On's got his game face on, ready to time his jump perfectly. On uses his air dance skill to fly through the sky and get right above the dragon's back. He prepares a thunder ball in his palm, ready to drop it, and a massive explosion rips across the creature's scales as his attack connects clean. The dragon lets out a pained groan, clearly rattled by the sudden hit, but it recovers fast and lets out a deafening roar that shakes the whole field. Seeing the beast's jaws open wide, On realizes his chance is finally here, and he jams the entire sack of sleep mushrooms deep into the dragon's throat before using another air dance to flip away. A loud gulp echoes as the beast swallows the whole bag. And as On sticks the landing back on the grass, Kinu rushes up and asks if the plan actually worked. He tells her that it definitely went down the hatch. And the dragon lets out a gross burp, while On explains that they just need to endure its next few moves, while he tries to paralyze it with more lightning magic. So Sync steps forward and says she'll use her taunt skill to keep the dragon's attention split between them all. She's not letting it focus on while he works, and Kinu gives a firm nod, telling the team to leave all the healing to her if things get messy. On shouts for them to move out, and the three of them charge forward to keep the pressure on the beast while the mushrooms start to kick in, and Sync puts her taunt to work while Kinu stays ready to cast. Meanwhile, On keeps the dragon busy with another well-placed strike. About 10 minutes go by and the dragon is barely standing. It's wobbling all over the place and looking completely gassed until it finally faceplants into the dirt with a heavy thud. On looks over and says it looks like it's finally out cold, so he tells Kinu and Sync to give him some space while he tries to pull that sword out. He walks up to the beast's back and stands right over the cursed blade. He grabs the hilt and pulls with everything he's got, but the sword won't move. He says it feels like the blade is literally fused to the dragon's skin. Realizing a normal pull won't work, he decides to just go all out. He triggers his thunder drum and swift lightning skills to give him a massive power boost. He lets out a huge roar and yanks on the hilt. We can hear the sound of the flesh tearing as the dragon screams in its sleep, and then the blade finally rips free with blood spraying everywhere. The dragon's head drops back down to the grass while On catches his breath. He thinks it's finally over, but then he feels something super weird. He realizes his MP is being sucked dry by the sword and panics. This cursed thing is way more dangerous than he thought. On's arm is shaking like crazy as he stares at the blade. He asks what the deal is with this magic sword while he lets it drop into the dirt. He takes a step back and says he was really caught off guard for a second. Sync notices he's acting weird and asks him what's going on. He looks at the creepy eye on the hilt and realizes the sword was actually trying to snatch away his consciousness. On breaks out in a cold sweat. He never expected a magic sword could be this dangerous to handle. Sink points out that if the sword is that bad, it must have been the thing that made the dragon go crazy. Kinu just looks up and asks what they're supposed to do with it now. On looks at his gear and remembers that his red ogre club actually has a weapon destruction effect built into it. He stares down the cursed blade and decides the best move is to just use that power to smash the magic sword for good. He pulls out the giant spiked club and gets ready to swing. He lets out a massive roar and puts every bit of his strength into a huge swing. The club slams down and the cursed sword shatters into tiny bits. On lets out a long breath as he looks at the broken blade. The cursed weapon is finally nothing but a pile of scrap metal and smoke. He slides his heavy club back into its holster, finished with the job. On tells the girls they should head back and report everything to Spalds. And right as he says it, the dragon's massive body starts to dissolve into light. But instead of nothingness, a young guy in a white cloak is left lying in the grass. The guy looks completely out of it with swirls in his eyes. He starts to say something about where he is but can barely get the words out. On doesn't waste any time and tells Kinu to get over there and heal him. She kneels down and casts a healing spell, letting the magic wash over the guy while he's still dazed. He lets out a rough groan as the magic starts to work and his head begins to clear. The guy sits up and asks where he is. On stands over him and asks if he's finally awake after everything that happened. On keeps a serious look on his face. He looks the guy in the eyes and asks if he's really that black dragon they were just fighting. Drake glares at the group, looking completely exhausted but still trying to act tough as he demands to know who the hell they think they are. He starts to go on a rant about his own importance, but he doesn't even finish the sentence before Sink clocks him right in the head. On just watches as Sink loses her patience, telling the guy he's got no right to talk to her master like that while she lands another heavy blow. She looks down at him with total disgust, calling him a shitty brat under her breath. The maid's scary side is fully out now, and she tells him she might just crush him into the dirt right here, leaving On to point out that her whole personality just did a complete 180, which makes her snap back into her polite maid act and start apologizing immediately. Drake still won't stay down though. He keeps yelling and asking who they are even while he's getting his head bounced off the ground. Sink tells him he's got zero manners for someone who was just saved and definitely needs some education, while Kinu tries to get her to chill, and On realizes Sink has totally flipped a switch. Fast forward a few minutes and the education is finished. Drake is kneeling in the grass with a bruised face, formally introducing himself and apologizing for being such a jerk. So Sink turns back to On and Kinu with a huge smile, asking if she can be the one to look after this fool from now on. Sink is all smiles while holding her weapon over Drake, promising she's going to train him into a top-tier servant, but On tells her she's taking things way too far. The maid doesn't back down though, saying she just wants him to understand how amazing On and Kinu really are, and then he'll naturally want to serve them. On decides to ignore the servant talk for a second and asks Drake how he even ended up getting possessed by that cursed magic sword in the first place. Drake looks pretty shaken up and admits that he doesn't really have a clear memory of what happened. He explains that he just has a fuzzy memory of someone stabbing him in the back while he was fast asleep, all while Sink gives him a terrifying look from the side. On asks if the guy remembers any specific details about the person who did it, then tells Sink to chill out because Drake is clearly struggling to even speak. Sink agrees to play nice since that's what her master wants, and Drake asks if it's actually okay for him to just talk like a normal person now. Drake thinks back and says he isn't totally sure, but he remembers the guy having bright red hair, a detail that immediately grabs On's attention. On thinks back to the blonde leader Martas and realizes that if the attacker had red hair, then it definitely wasn't the guy he was thinking of, which leads him to tell the group that explaining the whole situation is probably going to take a long time. Drake starts opening up about his past, explaining that he's actually from the Dragonborn race and grew up in their village way past the Red Valley. His parents are actually the chiefs there, but things went south when he lost a big duel against his older brother to see who would take over the village next. Losing made him so bitter that he went on a huge rampage to blow off steam, and he was just trying to sleep off the exhaustion when someone stabbed him in the back, though On doesn't feel bad for him and says he probably brought that on himself. Drake gets defensive and says his brother totally cheated by drugging his food before the fight so he couldn't use any of his real power, leaving On looking a bit skeptical, saying he doesn't know all the specifics but it's clear the guy has some issues to work through. He stops the lecture for a second and asks Drake what he actually wants to do with his life now that he's free, making it clear that he's not going to force anyone to join his party, and if Drake has some other goal, he's more than welcome to just walk away. Drake stays quiet for a moment while he thinks it over, But then he suddenly looks up and says he really wants to get stronger, shouting that he doesn't even care about his village anymore. He's just completely sick of losing to people and wants to change that. On realizes they're all after the same thing and tells Drake that since they share the same goal, they might as well stick together. He notes that while getting stronger takes a ton of work, doing it with a group is way better than being alone, making Drake look pretty relieved as he asks if they're really going to let him join. On says they've got no issues with it, but Sync steps in to set some ground rules, telling the dragon guy he's going to have to sign a formal contract to serve on. Kinu gives him a friendly smile and adds that he shouldn't stress about it too much. If he ever hates it, they can just cancel the whole thing. Drake starts opening up, admitting that he was actually partially awake while they were all trading blows earlier, and even though getting wrecked was a hit to his pride, he was actually jealous watching how much they all had each other's backs. He still has some blurry memories of the fight, but he's seen enough to know he wants in. He starts to ask to join, then just yells out that he wants On to be his big brother, leaving On looking a little bit awkward. He scratches his head and says the big brother title is a bit much, but he'll roll with it. Drake cracks a small smile now that it's official, saying it looks like they've finally got a deal. Everyone starts settling in, and Sync wasted no time telling Drake she's going to be training him hard from now on. Kinu keeps it sweet, saying they should all just try to be friends, while On welcomes him to the team. Drake's actually a pretty polite kid, bowing down and calling them his big brother and big sisters as he promises to do his best. And once the introductions are over, On says he wants to take a quick look at Drake's stats. Drake's totally down for it, giving him a quick shoutback calling out his status screen for everyone to see. It pops right up, showing he's level 41 and specializes in wind magic and flying, making On nod as he checks the details. He thanks Drake for showing him, but right as he's looking it over, he hears someone shouting from across the field. It's Spalds and a bunch of other guys riding in on horses. He sounds pretty panicked, yelling out to ask if On is okay and where the heck that dragon disappeared to, so the group stops what they're doing as the riders pull up. Spalds hops off his horse and mentions that the Phantom Spring Breeze party is right behind them, so On gives them a little smirk, admitting that a ton of stuff just went down. He tells them to relax and says he'll give them the short version of how things ended up, while even the horses just stand there chewing grass, waiting to hear the crazy story. Once On explains everything, Spalds completely loses his mind. He can't believe that the massive dragon they were hunting is actually just this dragonkin kid, or that a cursed sword called Flam was the reason for all the chaos. Drake just looks away, feeling pretty bad about the whole thing. He admits that he only went on that rampage because he was too weak to keep himself under control. Drake bows his head as low as it can go, offering a sincere apology for all the trouble and injuries he caused the group's friends while he was out of control. But Spalds tells him to relax since nobody actually died, and even the guys from the Phantom Spring Breeze party are already on the mend. He points out that since the cursed sword was the real problem, Drake is basically a victim himself, so they accept the apology and agree to just put the whole thing behind them. They start heading out together, and as they walk, Drake lets out a big sigh of relief, though he still feels bad about it all. He swears right then and there that he's going to train until he's way stronger so he can eventually pay them back for their kindness, which makes On give him a small smile, saying he's looking forward to seeing that. He's just glad everything settled down without any more drama. But then On speaks up to get the guild master's attention, calling out to Spalds while holding up the broken pieces of the cursed blade. He explains that this is the sword Flam and mentions how Drake said some guy with red hair stabbed him with it while he was sleeping. He asks Spalds if he knows anyone like that, but Spalds says he can't really be sure just from a description. He asks if he can hold onto the weapon for a while, since he'll need it to prove what happened when he files his report with the capital. And then he gives On a reassuring grin, telling him not to stress about the kid. He promises to make sure the official word is that Drake was just another victim of the sword's curse, leaving On looking a bit surprised by how helpful he's being. He realizes they're really in this together now, asking if this means they're officially part of the same team. Spalds lets On know that his group is going to head back to town first, but he tells them to make sure they stop by the guild later on. He says they'll figure out the whole reward situation then, and since the adventurers are already riding off, On just waves and yells out a thanks as they disappear into the distance. Now that they're alone, On tells the others he wants to stick around and hunt for a bit longer before heading home. He mentions that he can feel himself getting really close to another evolution, so Kinu doesn't miss a beat and says she's definitely coming along with him. While they plan their hunt, Sync chimes in and says that she'll take Drake and head back to the dungeon first. Drake looks pretty surprised by the idea, especially when Sync gives him this really creepy smile and says she has plenty to explain to him. On sees Drake start to sweat and just hopes she doesn't go too hard on the guy, but Sync just says they're leaving and Drake nervously follows her lead as they teleport away. On watches them go and silently wishes Drake good luck before turning back to Kinu. He says it's finally time for them to get to work, and soon the two of them are deep in the Morphia forest. On says they should just blast through this and level up as fast as possible, so Kinu starts throwing out her magic while he moves in, leading to On letting loose with a massive swing that absolutely wrecks everything in front of him. On finishes his swing and takes a second to breathe while the dust settles. He looks pretty worn out, but suddenly he feels a weird spark of energy hitting his body. He asks if the evolution is finally starting, because the next thing he knows, dark energy and light start swirling around him like crazy. The name Rakshasa Heaven flashes across the air as he fully transforms into his new powerful form, so On shouts for his status screen to see what changed. A massive wall of text pops up showing off some insane new stats and skills that actually shock him. He says that just looking at these numbers, he's probably on the same level as an S-rank adventurer now. Kinu is right there beside him, cheering and telling him how amazing he looks, which makes him decide it's time to head back to Lekria. He tells Kinu they should get going since the evolution is done, and they start walking through the city gates together. The local guys in town spot them coming from a distance, looking pretty surprised to see them back so soon. One adventurer points them out and shouts to his friend, while the girl next to him just stands there in shock, wondering if it's really the duo everyone's been talking about. As they walk further in, a huge crowd just swarms them. People are screaming out On's new nickname Black Thunderclap and thanking them for saving the town. On and Kinu look totally overwhelmed by all the attention, especially with fans yelling at On to look their way and others getting way too excited over Kinu. The news has clearly spread everywhere. One guy yells that the guild master told everyone about them taking down the black dragon. On and Kinu just try to push through the crowd while everyone treats them like total celebrities. On can feel the difference immediately. Those stares that used to be full of nothing but curiosity have completely flipped into looks of deep respect and admiration from everyone around him. It hits him right then that he and Kinu have finally been accepted by the town, even as a massive crowd swarms the streets and yells their names from every window and balcony in sight. The two of them eventually manage to slip away, peeking around a corner while looking totally drained, and that's when a familiar voice calls out, calling him a hero. It's Spolds, and he jokes about how long it took them to get through the mob. He admits he's the one who made sure they got all the credit for the job, leaving On and Kinu looking pretty exhausted by the whole mess. Spolds just laughs and tells them not to sweat it, saying that if they're planning on having Drake in their party, they're going to need this kind of big reputation to make it work. On sees his point, but Kinu admits the whole experience was actually a little bit scary. On just offers a quick apology for being late as they try to get back to business. Spolds then mentions he's already sent out a formal report about the entire situation to Merelda over in the royal capital, keeping things official. As for the reward, it's going to be tied in with the launch of the new clan. Spolds asks for about a week to get everything sorted, so On decides they'll just head out and come back then. Before leaving, On remembers to let the guild master know where they'll be. He explains they're staying at Prensveld, that new beastman village right in the middle of the plains. He tells Spolds to contact Baru Baru if anything comes up, and Spolds just nods, mentioning he's already heard plenty of talk about that village from the local adventurers. Spolds nods and says he'll send a messenger on a fast horse when everything is ready. On feels pretty good about himself. He managed to bring up Prensveld naturally without it being weird, so he gives a wave and says that's the plan for now, but as he's walking away, Spolds calls out and tells him to hang on. On stops and asks if there's something else they need to cover. Spolds looks a little stressed as he admits there's actually one more thing, explaining that Count Stedrius, the guy who runs Lekria, really wants to meet them. He asks if On can head over to the Lord's mansion right this second, and On isn't exactly thrilled about it. He thinks to himself that nobles are kind of a pain to deal with, but he eventually gives in and says he'll do it. Spolds tries to relax him by saying the Count is actually a pretty good guy. He explains that the noble just wants to say thank you in person, so he asks On to just show up as a favor. The second On steps outside, the crowd is all over him again. People are screaming his and Kinu's names, calling them heroes and begging for autographs, while On just sighs and realizes he's stuck in the middle of another mob. He tries to push through the fans while thinking about where he's actually going. He figures the mansion has to be that massive building right in the middle of town, so he starts heading that way. The mansion is huge, a big, fancy white building that stands out from everything else. On finally reaches the front steps and lets out a sigh of relief that he actually made it through the crowd. A butler opens the door and greets them right away, saying they've been expecting both him and Kinu. He steps aside and invites them both to come inside the house. Lord Stedrius smiles while greeting them, acknowledging them as the famous duo known as Black Lightning. He officially introduces himself as the Lord of Lekria, looking pretty relaxed as he brings up the whole dragon incident. He makes it clear how much he appreciates them putting their lives on the line to fix the mess, but On just brushes it off, saying it was just a job from the guild master and he was just doing his duty. The Lord laughs at that and tells him there's no need to be so modest about it. He explains that he likes staying on the good side of talented adventurers like them. Before they head out, he asks them to keep looking after the city of Lekria. The butler bows and sees them out of the mansion. As they walk away, On thinks to himself that for a noble, the guy was actually pretty cool and treated them well despite being non-humans. Back at the inn, Drake and Sink are just sitting around the table waiting for the others to return. On finally walks through the door and lets them know he's back, catching both of them by surprise, especially Drake, who looks relieved to see them. Sink jumps up to welcome her master and Kinu home, while Drake follows suit by calling them his big brothers and giving them a warm welcome. On asks if the explanation for Drake is finally finished. Sink confirms she filled him in on everything, which has Drake looking completely starstruck by how awesome his new group is. On gets serious for a second and says he needs to have a talk with Eris and the other dungeon cores. He turns to the rest of the group and asks what they're planning to do next. Kinu looks at On with total devotion, making it clear she isn't going anywhere and is sticking by his side, while Drake is actually looking pretty motivated. He says he's heading to Lekria to sign up as an adventurer and start taking on quests. He's determined to pay everyone back for the mess he caused, so Sink decides to step in and says she'll tag along with Drake to keep an eye on him. On tells the whole group they'll be on their own for the next week, but they should use telepathy to check in if anything goes sideways. Kinu and Sink agree right away, while Drake gives a sharp salute. And after that, the dungeon core's Eris and Urus show up to get down to business. Baru gets the call through telepathy and joins the group, looking a bit surprised by the sudden summon. The five of them sit around a table to figure out the dungeon management details. On tells them he wants to get the Prenzvelt dungeon open for business as soon as possible, and Kinu asks when he's planning to start. When On says they're doing it tomorrow, Baru starts panicking a bit because it's so sudden, asking if there's actually a plan behind this. On just smiles and says he wants to make sure the dungeon becomes the talk of the town. He mentions he already tipped off Spalds about the Beastman village, and the first step is making the dungeon entrance appear in the middle of the night, right where everyone will see it. On explains the plan to the group tomorrow morning. He and Baru are going to talk to the villagers and explain everything so nobody catches a bad case of panic. Baru chimes in saying the village will be totally fine, and the villagers look like they've finally got some peace of mind. At the same time, they're going to report the discovery to the Lekria Guild, with Sink and Kinu already practicing their big announcement while Spalds gives them the thumbs up. But On points out the real trick. Since the old village dungeon just vanished, people will naturally assume this new one just popped up to take its place. Kinu thinks it's a solid plan, while Eris and Urus are totally on board, saying it's exactly the kind of clever move they'd expect from him. So On gets that crazy look in his eyes and says an unexplored dungeon is basically the ultimate dream for any adventurer. To hook them in, he decides they'll stash some high-end blue rarity treasure chests right on the starting floors, the perfect bait to get people through the door. He knows that once the adventurers start swarming the place, a guild branch will have to open up, and then the rest of the town will follow with inns and shops popping up everywhere. And Kinu catches on quick, realizing that a bigger crowd means way more dungeon points for them. On tells her she's spot on, though he makes one thing clear: he's not actually planning on letting anyone reach the end. He and Urus are just going to keep building new floors and making things harder as they get more points. And with the whole plan ready to go, he tells the team it's time to get started. On kicks things off by telling Kinu and Eris to handle the maintenance for the clan house. They're both totally on board, with Urus and Eris giving him a quick shout that they've got it covered, so the whole crew starts feeling the hype, especially Kinu and Eris, who can't wait to see how things turn out. On admits it's about to get pretty hectic, but he's counting on them, and with that he calls the meeting to an end. Everyone gets straight to work on their specific tasks. While Kinu and Urus are busy setting up the interior and getting the house ready, Baru is outside focused on the village plans and making sure everything is lined up for the big move. Under the cover of night, On and Eris quietly set up the treasure chests to bait the adventurers, officially opening up the new dungeon right next to the houses. And then morning finally hits the village. It doesn't take long for the beastmen living there to notice something is up. The whole place is buzzing with nervous energy as everyone starts gathering around to see what's going on, leaving the villagers staring at the glowing entrance of the new dungeon in total shock. One guy says their luck has officially run out, while a hoarse beastman starts panicking about having to pack up and evacuate the whole place again. Baru jumps right into the middle of the crowd trying to keep the peace. He's waving his arms and telling everyone to just stay calm, but they're way too freaked out to listen and start yelling back at him. so the villagers keep spiraling, thinking their dream of a safe home is already over. On watches from a distance and realizes Baru Baru is having a really hard time managing the crowd on his own, and he decides it's time to step in. He walks right up to the group and asks what all the screaming is for. As soon as Baru Baru sees him, he looks like a weight just lifted off his shoulders. The villagers are losing it as they point toward the center of town where a glowing dungeon entrance has just appeared, and they start begging for someone to just smash the thing already while Baru Baru breaks down in tears, apologizing to On for failing to keep things under control. But then On steps up and yells for everyone to shut up and listen because he actually thinks this is the best thing that could have happened. And while the crowd stays in a total panic, Baru Baru just stands there frozen, wondering if On has finally lost his mind along with everyone else. On starts explaining that in the country next door, the biggest and richest city actually has a massive dungeon right in the middle of it. And the only reason they're so safe is because they keep the monsters thinned out, which keeps a stampede from ever happening. Baru Baru just nods along nervously while On lays out the rest of the plan, saying they'll talk to the guild and get an official branch set up right there in the village so everyone can finally feel safe. The villagers just stare at him with these worried looks, not totally convinced yet. But On keeps going, telling them the real reason this is a lucky break is that a dungeon is going to draw people in from everywhere, which means they can start businesses, make a ton of money, and turn this tiny village into something huge. On starts describing a vision of the future where this place turns into a city that's actually fun to live in, and then asks the crowd what they think of that. It works instantly, with the villagers finally dropping their fear and yelling out that they're totally on board, while Kinu steps up to add that since beastmen aren't really welcome in most other cities right now, making this place huge is their chance to prove they can build something of their own and make the world better, and she gets even more hyped, asking the crowd if this doesn't sound like a blast, while admitting she's so excited she can't even sit still. The energy in the crowd completely shifts as a few guys start talking about giving it a shot just so they can finally get rich, and then the girls start chiming in too, with one wanting to open a clothing shop while her friend decides she's going to run the local bar. On tells them that's the spirit and cheers them on, while Kinu yells for everyone to come together and build the ultimate beastman city. And pretty soon everyone is throwing out ideas for parks, bookstores, and fancy cafes, all of them finally looking forward to the future until later that night. On sits quietly in his room and calls out through a mental link to see if Sync and Drake can hear him, and they both check in immediately, with Sync being formal as always while Drake just lets him know he's listening. On tells Sync that he's officially opened the entrance to the Prenzvelt dungeon and needs her to head over to the guild to report it. Sync nods, saying she'll handle the announcement right away. Just then Drake jumps in all excited, mentioning he finally registered as an adventurer and already hit C rank. He's hyped because now he can start paying On back, which gets him a solid well done from the boss. On lays out the next steps, explaining that he and Kinu are heading to Lekria in a few days, so the other two should just keep busy with quests until they hear from him. Both Sync and Drake confirm they've got the message. As they wrap things up, On thinks to himself that this should be enough to start bringing some real traffic to the dungeon. He plans to just hang back for a bit and watch how things go while he makes some final tweaks. Fast forward 5 days and the plan is already working. The village is buzzing with energy as adventurers start gathering around the new stone entrance to see what the place is all about. On stands nearby watching the crowd and realizes the turnout is actually way bigger than he expected. Meanwhile, some local adventurers are already talking shop, hoping they can score some rare blue loot for themselves. Word of mouth is traveling fast because the very first party that went inside managed to bring back some high-quality gear. It looks like the rumors of good drops are really starting to pull people in. Eris checks in looking pretty proud of himself, pointing out that even the lower-ranked guys can explore the top floors safely if they just team up. He reports that they've already got 5 different parties in there working the floors. The heavy hitters are starting to show up too, like the A-rank party Phantom Spring Breeze. They're currently the ones leading the pack and pushing deeper into the dungeon than anyone else. They even managed to wreck the Red Ogre waiting on the 10th floor. After finding a rare blue-tier bow in a treasure chest right after the fight, they decided to call it a win and head back to town. Urus reports that as of yesterday, the dungeon construction is finished all the way to the 13th floor. He's confident that no one's getting through it for now, but On is already looking at the map thinking they need more floors and much nastier bosses. While they're going over the layout, Urus holds up a new scroll and mentions that a letter from Spalds arrived via fast horse earlier this morning. On takes the scroll looking a bit surprised. He says it's pretty quick considering the reward pickup wasn't supposed to happen until tomorrow, making him wonder what's up. Since duty calls, On tells Sync and Drake that he's taking Kinu and heading over to Lekria for a little while. The group waves them off as they head out toward the city gates. Back at the guild, Spalds meets them and apologizes for calling them in so early, but he explains that the rewards actually came in today. He gets right to the point, saying he wanted to talk about the Prenzvelt dungeon, but first, they need to handle the business regarding their rewards. Spalds drops some massive news, announcing that On, Kinu, and Sink have all been officially promoted to S-rank adventurers. On just stands there in total shock as he's told their group is now an S-rank party. On completely loses it, asking if Spalds is for real since they only registered as adventurers a month ago. Even Spalds has to admit that a jump like this is basically unheard of in guild history. Spalds explains that not having any S-rank parties in the city was starting to look really bad for them, so they decided to fast-track the group's promotion to solve the problem. Drake looks pretty relieved when he asks about his own situation, and Spalds tells him that since he's being viewed as a victim, they aren't going to press any charges against him. Spalds lets them know that as long as they're working under the supervision of Black Lightning, everything should be fine, so they should probably be thanking him, and On doesn't hesitate to bow down and show his appreciation. Moving on, Spalds mentions that the application for their clan also went through without a hitch. Then he asks the group if they've actually picked out a name for themselves yet. On stands there with Drake, Kinu, and Sink, looking pretty confident. He starts to tell Spalds that they've already got the perfect name picked out, and as everyone looks On proudly announces that their new clan will be called Seiha. He goes on to say their ultimate goal is to become the strongest in the whole world. Kinu adds that it was a group decision, and while Sink thinks it's a massive dream, Drake is sure they can actually make it happen. Since they're aiming for the top, Spalds says he's got some perfect news. He asks if they've heard about the big clan battle tournament happening at the royal capital in a couple of months. The event is officially called the Ranking War, and it's a huge deal used to rank every clan in the Alto Kingdom. Usually, you have to be established for 2 years just to get an invite, but the higher-ups are so interested in their potential that they've granted the group special permission to skip the wait and join the competition early. Spalds admits it's not going to be an easy win by any means, but he's personally stoked to see what they can do, so he officially asks if they're down to enter. Sink is all for it, and On gets fired up with a huge grin. He tells Spalds that if they're going to be in it, they're going to win the whole thing. Spalds lets out a big laugh, telling On he figured that's exactly what he'd say, and he adds that Count Stedrius is going to be just as happy to hear the news. But that's not all. As Spalds mentions, he's got one last reward that'll probably be On's favorite. He explains he pulled every string he had with the Count to track it down. Kinu is totally shocked by the surprise, while On can't believe there's still more coming. Spalds reaches out and presents a long, sheathed weapon. On's eyes go wide as he realizes he's looking at a genuine takai. He carefully grips the handle, feeling the quality of the craftsmanship. He's almost in disbelief, asking Spalds if this is actually for real. On looks up, asking if it's really okay for him to take something this valuable. Spalds just smiles and says he thought about giving him money instead, but seeing his reaction proves the sword was the better call. Focused on the gift, On activates his appraisal skill to see exactly what he's dealing with. The stats pop up and they're insane. It's a red rarity blade called Shurinumaru, made by a master smith from the land of Wa. It's got high attack power and a special effect that lets the user dump magic into it for extra elemental damage, leaving On completely floored. On starts yelling about how this thing is on a whole different level. Spalds is actually impressed, asking if On can use appraisal to see all that. Spalds explains it's a high-end magic sword. He mentions that not many people can handle a takai these days, but he had a feeling it would suit On's style perfectly. On takes a nervous gulp as he stares at the blade. He admits that while he knows the style, he's only really used one a few times when he was just a kid. On is absolutely losing it with excitement, yelling out a huge thank you while promising that he's definitely going to master this new blade soon. Spalds just stands there with a smirk, thinking to himself that this is the first time he's ever seen On act like a normal kid. He tells On that seeing him this hyped makes all the work he put into finding the sword worth it, and he adds that he's counting on to keep looking out for Lecria from now on, which On agrees to with a loud shout. On suddenly switches gears, asking Spalds what the latest word is on the Prenzvelt dungeon. Spalds gets a bit more serious, saying he has a secret favor to ask and that he's only sharing this info with A rankers and above. He explains that it's actually possible to destroy a dungeon. On tries to act surprised, but he's secretly sweating. Spalds mentions the recent stampede and how an S-rank party called Silver Sand Moon smashed the core of that dungeon, making the whole place vanish. Looking pretty stressed, Spalds tells On that even if they clear Prenzvelt, he really doesn't want them to break the core. He explains that a well-managed dungeon is basically a gold mine, mentioning that 4 parties have already found high-tier gear there in just 1 week. The idea is to keep adventurers coming from all over to try their luck, because if they show up to clear the dungeon, the whole city nearby starts making serious money. Things are moving fast because the Green Plains are now officially under Lecria's control, and it's already been decided that a new branch of the Adventurers Guild is getting built right at Prensveld. Spalds looks pretty serious as he explains that this isn't just about the city's growth anymore. Turns out, having the dungeon around is actually a must if they want to help the Beastman village develop. He looks at On and tells him he's counting on him to keep the residents safe, asking him to handle the whole situation with the highest level of care, and On agrees to help out, though he looks a little nervous while mentioning that they really need to get that branch office up and running right away, so Spalds thanks him and promises to deal with the office setup immediately. With the business side of things finally sorted out for now, On decides they'll head back to Prensveld after a quick hunting trip in the Morphia forest, though his real goal is just finding a chance to test out his new sword. As they start moving, On looks back and asks Sink and Drake what they're planning to do next, and Drake says he wants to power through as many quests as possible because staying at C rank just doesn't look cool for a guy like him. Then Sink chimes in, saying Drake definitely needs a supervisor to keep him in line, so she's going to stick with him to make sure everything goes right. On tells them that sounds like a plan and encourages them to keep at the quests while he and Kinu head off. Kinu tells Drake it's time to head out, and Sink is right behind her, calling Kinu's sister as she gets ready to move. While they're at the Dragonborn village, Drake mentions he still feels bad about the trouble he caused back in Lecria and needs to make it right somehow. But his mind slips back to a memory of his home, where a younger version of himself is getting knocked around by a giant white dragon, until someone calls the match. The referee declares Fafnir the winner of the duel, leaving Drake lying on the ground, bruised and completely frustrated with how things went down. He slowly starts to pick himself back up, muttering to himself that he's not finished and that he can still keep going. Drake begs his father for a rematch the next day, making excuses about not being able to find his strength. But his dad shuts him down, yelling that there are no redos for a fight this important. His father tells him point-blank that he only lost because he's still a total amateur, which makes Drake realize he might never get the chance to fix his mistake. In their culture, a Dragonborn has to be able to win no matter what, because without that kind of power, there's no way they can lead the village. Looking at his brother, Drake realizes he never actually cared about the title of chief. He just hated that it ended before he could show what he's really capable of. So he shouts that he can still fight, desperately wanting another chance because all he ever really wanted was for his dad to finally recognize his strength. The situation gets tense as Drake's father stands by his dragon with a cold look. While the village men move in, someone yells to grab him and hold him down before things get even worse. Drake starts struggling as they pin his arms back. He's screaming at them to let go, swearing that he's not done yet and can still keep the fight going. In his head, all he can think about is how much he wanted his brother and his old man to finally see that he's strong. He just wanted a little bit of respect. His father doesn't want to hear it and has him thrown into a cell, telling him to just sit there and cool his head for a bit while the heavy lock clicks shut. Sitting in the dark, Drake starts to spiral, thinking about how he completely trashed a sacred match and wondering if they're actually gonna execute him for it. Suddenly, the cell door starts to rattle and Drake looks up as the lock turns. His father is standing right there in the doorway, calling out his name. His dad doesn't step inside though. He just stands there and tells Drake he needs to get out and leave the village for good. Drake is completely stunned, asking why he's being kicked out, but his father just tells him to stop talking and go right now. He realizes his dad is actually giving him a chance to run before things get worse, so he grips his shirt and decides to take the exit while he still can. He shifts into his dragon form and takes off into the sky, shouting back that he's leaving because he wants to flying far away from the only home he's ever known. Drake is flying through the sky in his dragon form. He's totally consumed by the anger he feels toward himself for how everything went down at home. He ends up at the Red Canyon and just starts wrecking everything in sight, rampaging around for days without stopping. In his head, he knows he's losing it. He feels like if he doesn't take his frustration out on something, he's going to completely break. While he's resting in the valley, a mysterious guy shows up and spots him, saying it's a dragon and that finding him is actually perfect timing. Suddenly, the dragon lets out a massive roar of pain. Some guy just stabbed a sword into his back and Drake can feel a crazy heat spreading. Drake watches the guy walk away, wondering who he even is, only seeing that the stranger has bright red hair. As he tries to process what happened, his eyes go wide with shock. A dark voice starts whispering in his head about needing more blood. He grabs his head in pain as evil thoughts start clouding his mind. The voice is just screaming for blood and demanding to drink. Drake tries his hardest to fight it off and stay in control, but he can feel himself losing the ability to move his own body. He sees a huge city in the distance and realizes he's flying toward it, while the thing inside him just lets out a creepy laugh, ready to cause some real trouble. The dark voice inside Drake's head is screaming for human blood, and he knows things are getting bad. He looks down at the town below and realizes that at this rate, he's going to end up wrecking the whole place. Drake hates what's happening and doesn't want to hurt anyone, but the power from the sword is just too much. He tries to fight back against the darkness, but he just can't resist the urge anymore, making him feel scared and in total pain as his mind starts to fade, and he literally begs for someone to stop him before he hits the ground hard. He's laying there in pain, wondering if someone actually heard him and stepped in to shut him down. Every time he tries to move, a massive explosion goes off, leaving him with no room to fight back. Drake watches on. Kinu and Sync work together. He's floored by their perfect teamwork and how much they trust each other. The three of them launch a combined attack that hits Drake with everything they've got, and just like that he goes down for good, thinking to himself how jealous he is of the bond they have. Drake finally opens his eyes looking totally wiped out, and On greets him by asking if he's finally awake. On stares him down and asks for confirmation if he's really that same black dragon they fought, while Drake processes everything and realizes he completely lost it. He asks the group if they were the ones who stepped in and stopped his rampage. Accepting the situation, Drake bows low to On and explains how he ended up making a formal contract to serve him, which leads to Sync filling him in on all the details he missed while he was out of it. As he listens, Drake thinks about the brutal path On, Kinu, and Sync had to take to get this far and realizes just how much he respects On's power and the kindness the girls showed him, even seeing that Sync isn't actually scary. He looks back at his life in the Dragon Village and sees his old pride was nothing. He decides he's going to spend his life protecting these guys. Drake stands tall with a clear head, saying that his real pride now is just being part of this team, and then Sync calls out to him, saying they need to get moving, so he follows her lead to catch up with the rest. Drake follows Sync's lead and calls out to her, while On stands there looking more determined than ever. He says he's going to keep getting stronger for his friends, so the group heads back into the forest where a huge monster gets sliced clean in half. Drake stands over the fallen beast while Kinu claps her hands, totally impressed by the blade. She says the sharpness is just incredible, and On looks at his sword, Shuranumaru, and says he really did get his hands on an amazing weapon. Kinu reminds him that their next big goal is that ranking battle happening in 2 months. So On stares down another monster and says that until then, he wants the whole group to level up as much as they possibly can. He clears the area with a giant slash, and then he tells Kinu they should keep knocking out quests while they renovate the dungeon at the same time. A month and a half passes by, and the area around the village has started to look completely different. A massive new guild building stands tall with a flag flying out front. On mentions how much the crowd has grown since the guild opened, and Kinu just nods along in agreement. The town is growing fast with new shops opening up everywhere, and even more humans have started moving into the area. Eris is looking pretty proud of the progress, saying that the whole development plan is moving along perfectly. On mentions that because of the growth, their dungeon points are exploding, and they've managed to expand down to the 25th floor. They even summoned an S-rank Hydra boss to really ramp up the difficulty. The dungeon is getting a solid reputation for safety because they put warp circles right before the dangerous rooms. Down at the local pub, some adventurers are bragging about how deep they managed to dive on their last run. On looks at his flourishing town and figures he doesn't need to worry about the village or the dungeon for now. So he turns his attention to Kinu, Sync, and Drake to ask them how their own training has been coming along lately. On can tell they've been putting in the work, and Sync tells him that all 3 of them have leveled up a ton. Drake is especially stoked, bragging about finally hitting a rank, which really impresses On, so he tells the group to give him a full report on their new stats so he can see exactly how strong they've gotten. The 3 of them are totally on board and get ready to show off their progress. Drake kicks things off by saying he reached level 49 while grinding solo. He's totally used to fighting in the air now, but he's still trying to master his combat style while in human form. Sync is up next for the report. She's evolved into a Hanya princess now that she's hit level 50, and she's strictly handling the tanking duties for the party. Kinu follows up with her own progress, explaining she also reached level 50 and evolved into a gold fox. Her magic is way stronger now, and she can even use flame blades for close quarters fighting while she's on the move. Kinu asks how On is doing, but Drake cuts in to mention he was focusing on his sword skills. Unfortunately, his level only went up by 1, so he hasn't seen any huge changes. Sync jumps in to defend On, saying it's totally understandable since he's been swamped with keeping the village and the dungeon running smoothly. But Drake reminds them they're leaving for the royal capital tomorrow, since they're going to be away for at least a month once they set off. On decides the best way to spend their last night is for everyone to sit down for a massive feast. The whole crew gathers around a table loaded with food, and Sync looks at the spread and mentions how the big day is finally almost here. Eris tells the group to leave everything at home to her and the others. She tells them not to worry about a thing and just focus on doing their best out there. Drake works on his dinner while pointing out that the rules for the upcoming ranking battle are still a mystery, so he thinks their only move is to fine-tune their gear once they hit Meralda. Eris clears her throat to get everyone's attention, saying that she, Eris, and Barubaru actually have something special they've been waiting to give the four of them before they go. Drake wonders what they've got planned, and Barubaru explains that since they're heading into serious combat, he wanted to make sure their equipment was as high quality as possible. Eris starts things off by handing over some new gear to Drake and Sync, telling them to hurry up and put the outfits on so everyone can see. Once they change, Drake is pretty blown away by the quality of his new set, while Sync notices she's finally matching the look of the rest of the party. Barubaru pipes up to explain that these are traditional Japanese-style clothes, specifically designed so that the whole group finally has a uniform look. He goes on to say that he picked these out because they fit their personalities perfectly, while making sure they don't sacrifice any defense for mobility. On jokes that the four of them are definitely going to turn heads if they walk around like that, but Drake's just happy because he's always wanted to wear this kind of stuff, and Sync is so touched she can barely find the words. Eris turns his attention toward Kinu next. Letting her know he's got something special for her too, he mentions how he heard she switched up her combat style recently, and he noticed she's been heading out to face enemies without a proper weapon lately. So to help her out, he pulls out a pair of dual swords that he says are super easy to use but still pack a serious punch. He hands over the new blades, called Mizuchi, and tells her that it's going to be up to her to figure out the best way to use them in a real fight. Kinu is absolutely thrilled with the gift, thanking him and promising to get started on her training immediately to master her new equipment. Eris saves the best for last, handing a small ring over to On while admitting he really overthought this gift before settling on it. On takes a close look at the piece of jewelry and decides to use his appraisal skill to see what he's actually working with, so he triggers the ability. A display pops up showing it's a ring of magic resistance that blocks stuff like poison, sleep, and paralysis. On is totally stoked, saying it's the one thing he actually needed the most. While Barubaru just smiles and says he's glad he likes it, Eris chimes in to remind everyone that the big departure is happening tomorrow, so they all need to head to bed and get some actual rest. On nods along, agreeing that they definitely need to be at their best for the journey ahead, while Drake and Sync look ready to go, with Drake saying they should use the rest of the day to just relax and prep for the trip. The next morning rolls around and the whole squad gathers outside, with On announcing to everyone that it's finally time to hit the road. Barubaru cheers them on as they leave, shouting for them to go out there and win the whole thing, and On just gives him a thumbs up. With the sun out and the team together, On looks ahead and tells the group it's time to move out. The group is making good time on the road, with Kinu mentioning that they should be reaching Meralda by the afternoon. Sync suggests they stick around the city for a few days to get their gear in order, and On agrees, saying the goal is to hit the capital before the tournament starts. Everyone is on the same page, with the whole squad chiming in to confirm they're ready for the next leg of the trip. As they walk toward the mountains, some local monsters hide behind the rocks and watch them pass by. The group keeps moving until On spots something on the horizon that catches his eye, making everyone stop. He points out that the city is finally in view, and they've officially arrived at the massive gates of the commercial city, Meralda. The place is absolutely packed with travelers and merchants, making the entrance look like a total mess of people. Kinu is blown away by the size of the crowd, while On just stares at the massive line and wonders if they really have to wait through all of it. They eventually make it to the front, and the guard at the gate asks them to hand over their identification so they can pass through. On pulls out their cards and hands them over, but as soon as the guard sees what's on them, he completely loses it. The guard realizes he's talking to S-rank adventurers and immediately tells them to head on through, while On just thanks him for the trouble. Before they get too far, On asks where the best place to stay is, and the guard points them toward the west side where all the inns and bars are clustered together. He highly recommends a spot called the Dancing Jester because the food is killer and the rooms are actually clean, waving them off with a "have a good trip." On gives him a quick shout back to say thanks, and the group makes their way into the heart of the city. They find the place with the jester sign hanging out front, but as soon as they walk in, the guy behind the counter starts apologizing. Turns out the place is nearly packed, and the clerk tells them they only have 2 rooms available, asking if that's going to work for the group. On says it's fine and suggests they just split the rooms by gender, making sure to ask for the dinner plan while the clerk thanks them. The guy gets all excited and tells them the food here is famous even in a big city like Meralda, so they're in for a treat. As they head to the rooms, Sync tells Kinu what an honor it is to share a space with her, and Kinu's just happy they'll have time to catch up and talk. Meanwhile, in the guy's room, On sits across from Drake and asks if there's something he needs to talk about, and Drake confirms he's got something on his mind. Drake mentions that he recently hit level 50, but he's pretty disappointed because his stats didn't jump up nearly as much as he was hoping they would. He explains that since he's a dragonborn, he doesn't get to evolve like other races, so he's stuck wondering how he's even supposed to get stronger. He's tried thinking of different ways to fight, but nothing really feels right yet.